I want to thank everyone for coming here today. I'm appreciative of the participation. I think the topic or the topics that are going to be presented here are important today. We put this meeting together to discuss forest products issues and really to get an update on issues important in the forest products industry. We've got an impressive panel here in front of us from government and industry, so we're looking forward to the information presented. I'm going to turn it to my co-chair, Representative Pashinsky, for opening comments, and then ask the members to introduce themselves, and also thank our host member, Representative Gobler, who is hosting us here today, and I know he has an opening comment. So I'll turn to Representative Pashinsky and then to Representative Gobler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a real pleasure to be here, and congratulations on this magnificent building. What a fitting and appropriate environment for the hardwoods. So congratulations to the owners and operators of this great place, and what a super time to have a hearing in this wonderful establishment. Hardwoods, we all know, is very important, so I can't wait for the testimony and continue on with our goal of making sure that the hardwoods remain one of the main parts of our ag industry and provide all the necessary resources to allow that industry to continue to thrive. To my left.
What are we doing, Marty?
Oh, okay, you want to start that way? All right.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and to everybody in the room, it really is a pleasure. I just want to welcome you on behalf of the citizens of Elk County and the citizens of the 75th District. My name is Matt Gobler. I represent the area in which you're all sitting, and it really is a pleasure to welcome you here. And personally, just to offer my own perspective, the timber industry and the great individuals and organizations that are involved are such an important part of our local economy that it has been so important to me to work on legislation and solutions that can help this industry in not only the great work they do for our economy, but also the great work that is done in conservation and preserving our wonderful outdoor heritage and the wonderful natural resources that we have in this region. So I just want to welcome everybody to Elk County. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for having a meeting in this great part of the state, and I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy your time here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Matt. We also have Senator Hutchinson here with us. If you'd want to introduce yourself, Senator.
Thank you for allowing me to be part of your meeting today. Obviously, forest products industry, very important to me and my district, as well as all of Pennsylvania. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and look forward to a great meeting today.
Senator Hutchinson has been on the Hardwood Development Council, I think, since its inception. So,
Not quite.
or nearly. So thank you for being here today, Scott.
And I'm Representative Clint Owlett. I took over for Representative Baker last year and serve in the 68th District, which is Tioga County, Potter County, and Bradford County. So Marty and I share a portion of Potter County. Hardwoods is a big part of my district, and I continue to want to learn as much as I can. I grew up on a dairy farm and have some lumber loggers in my business, in my family, so I'm looking forward to continuing to learn what's going on in the industry. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Art Wintley, and I represent the 17th Legislative District, which includes portions of Lawrence, Mercer, Crawford, and Erie counties. And I wanted to mention that I had a bill last session that included an amendment from Senator Hutchinson, which had to do with permitting for loggers. Some of you may be familiar with that. Give a 5-year extension on that. My great-great-grandpa, it's my understanding, Schweitzer from Blair's Corners in Clarion County, used to float logs, I guess, down the river back in the day. I imagine that was some virgin timber down the Clarion, Allegheny, down to Pittsburgh. And then my great-grandpa and great-great-grandpa, I guess it would be, on my mom's side, had a lumber mill in Greenville for many, many years. So thank you very much for having us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Representative Russ Diamond. I'm from the 102nd District. That is basically down in Lebanon County, which is about 20 miles downwind of Harrisburg. I really look forward to this trip because usually when we talk about an ag committee meeting, we talk about cows or poultry or spotted lanternfly or old barns or what have you. So it's great to come up here and see a different aspect of Pennsylvania's great agriculture industry. We don't have a whole lot of logging that goes on down in Lebanon County, but we do have a very large employer with Weber Sawmill, a very innovative, large employer. I don't know how many people here may be shipping logs down to them. We're very grateful that they are there, not as just as a business, but as a large employer. And like Park, my friend here, my ancestors were in the logging business. The mother's side of my family, they owned one of the largest logging concerns in Washington State at one time, probably more than 130 years ago. They divested themselves of that, but very, very fascinating to come up here and see this aspect of Pennsylvania's growing agricultural industry.
Well, it's good to be in, are we in McKean County?
No.
We're in Elk, okay. I know we're somewhere.
Not Kansas anymore.
Out in the wilderness. I did actually lose cell service and wasn't sure I'll find my way up here. But anyway, it's good to be here, and my district is the 99th district in Lancaster County. And I have Conestoga Wood Specialties, and my district office in New Holland is at Quality Custom Kitchens. And so we either raise produce or we work in the cabinet shops. And we have a lot of Amish that have started these small cabinet shops over the last number of years. So they rely on you guys a lot, and very, very important business to my district. So it's good to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversations and see what some of the issues are, and certainly willing to help do what we can. Agriculture is still, the largest industry in Pennsylvania, and forest products are a big part of that. So it's good to be here, and look forward to meeting all of you. Thanks.
I'm Representative Hershey from Juniata, Mifflin, and Franklin counties. I think I'm the newest member of the House and the committee here. But I come from a big ag background, long line of dairy farmers and farm equipment dealers. But this is a new side of ag for me, but very important to my district. We have Metzler Forest Products and quite a few cabinet makers and things like that. So it's a new thing to learn about for me here today, and I'm excited to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Carrie Golden. I'm the Executive Director of the Agriculture Committee.
You've got the mic. You might as well go ahead and
introduce you? Yes. So my name is Chris Guth. I'm the Resource Manager with Northwest Hardwoods. Northwest Hardwoods has, in Pennsylvania, has sawmills two sawmills in Forest County, and one near Uniontown, and we have other dry kill facilities in Ridgeway and Titusville, and I'm missing one. So quite a presence in Pennsylvania. I am also currently the president of the board of AHUG.
Thank you. My name is Bert Craig. I'm the general manager with Matson Lumber. We have facilities in Brookville, Corsica, and Harrisville along the I-80 corridor. I am the immediate past chair of the Pennsylvania Forest Products Association and come representing them in part today.
I'm Susan Swanson. I'm the director of the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group, or AHUG. And we represent 14 counties in the Northwest and North Central. We're a support organization for the hardwood industry. And these are my guys.
Lucky you.
Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm Ken Kane. I met many of you 2 years ago when you came up here and had this committee meeting. We did a woods tour together, which was a watershed moment, I think, for a lot of us. But I'm the president of Generations Forestry, and we're a private forest consulting firm managing timberland across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as well as New York State.
Hello, my name is Wayne Bender. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Hardwoods Development Council, an agency or bureau within the Department of Agriculture, created by the legislature in 1988, and we have 26 voting members that represent both industry and the government to work together on forest products and issues. Representative Pajinski is on the council, and Senator Hutchison, as well as Representative Kathy Rapp. We're still needing a senator from the Democratic Party.
Good afternoon. I'm John Norbeck. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and my deputate is Parks and Forestry and also our engineering group. The Secretary sends her regrets that she's unable to be here. I was, like Ken, I had the great opportunity to be up here 2 years ago. I guess we were out in Bradford to address this group and talk about the Green Ribbon Task Force, and we look forward to talking about some of the things that have come out of that over the past 2 years.
We've avoided spilling a glass of water yet, and I'm going to try hard not to be the one who does it. I've kind of prepared. Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Albright. I'm an assistant state forester, one of three. Our director, Ellen Schultz-Barger, sends her regrets. She could not be here as well. I work with 12 of our 20 forest districts in Pennsylvania, basically up through the middle of the state from New York to Maryland. They're largely the ones that hold the bulk of state forest land. Always a pleasure to be in St. Mary's. My daughter, I'm getting ready to ship off to State College here for school in a few weeks, actually is a native by birth here at St. Mary's, so always glad to get back when we can.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Gustafson. I am the Forestry Program Manager for the statewide program for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. People think Game Commission, they think forestry. How does that go together? Well, actually, the Game Commission is the second largest single ownership of forest land in the state of Pennsylvania, second only to DCNR, Bureau of Forestry. And we actually have properties that we manage across 65 of the 67 counties. So we have quite a footprint, and we have quite a large program. Our primary focus for managing our game lands is for wildlife and wildlife habitat on a sustainable, long-term basis. And we can't do that without a robust and sustainable forest products industry working as partners with us. So one of the focuses of our programs is to continue to work with industry to find ways to partner to do things more efficiently and more effectively when we're working in our forests on game lands. Thanks for being here, and it is good I'm kind of sort of back to my home turf. I'm from McKean County originally, but I also worked at Weber Sawmill at one point in time as a forester in my youth, so I've traveled around quite a bit, but it's always good to be back in the northern tier.
Well, thank you all very much. How's the audio? Can anyone?
I don't think it's really necessary. I don't think it's projecting anything from the microphones. I think if everybody just speaks up, I think passing the microphones back and forth seems like it's going to be more trouble than it's worth.
It was working before.
It didn't sound like it was coming through any sound system when I walked by.
It is now? Oh, okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I want to thank everyone for coming together. As has been noted, this is sort of a follow-up to a meeting we had 2 years ago up in Bradford where we had a roundtable discussion on forest products issues that, quite frankly, was very informative for the committee. And as Ken stated, he took us out in the woods. We learned a lot from that experience. And obviously 2 years has gone by, and we thought that this is a great opportunity to have another discussion like this to be able to get an update on forest products issues. One of the things that's been important to me since I started chairing this committee was to bring some focus to the forest products issue, because the Agriculture Committee has always focused on a wide variety of issues because, quite frankly, we tackle a lot of issues. But one that maybe the committee hadn't always looked at was forest products issues. But forest products is a huge part of our agriculture industry in Pennsylvania. So it's so important for the committee to be updated on issues of importance to forest products. So I really do appreciate all of you folks coming here today. We had really hoped that this would be sort of an interactive discussion. I know that you probably all have issues that you want to raise, and that's great. We want to have a discussion with you on those issues. So you're welcome to bring up any forestry-related issue that you'd like, and we really would like to have, it may be tough for the camera guys here, but we would like to have that interactive discussion where the members can feel free to ask questions on the issues that maybe you raise. So is there someone that would like to kick this off by bringing up a topic, or leave that open to whoever would like to do it? John?
I can certainly do that. I guess to start, I just want to talk just a little bit about DCNR and kind of figure out where our position is and what our responsibilities are, particularly to the hardwood industry. But as you noted, in Pennsylvania, agriculture is the #1 economic driver of Pennsylvania. And a large part of that agriculture is forestry. About $17 billion a year comes back into the state's economy through forestry. So without forestry, in that equation, agriculture would then become #2 industry or economic driver in Pennsylvania. The #2 economic driver is actually tourism, and DCNR is very pivotal in that with our state parks, and particularly our state forests. And folks think about our state forests as being very low-dense recreation, but we've seen a tremendous increase in recreational uses in state forests to the point that we believe that they have become very much a major portion of that economic driver when it comes to the ecotourism side of things. We look at opportunities on the hardwoods development side from both our state forest lands. We manage 2.2 million acres of state forest lands, but we also look at it from the private industry side of things and private landowner side of things. And we have service foresters who work in each of our 20 forest districts that work with private landowners, trying to help them decide how best to manage their properties for the things that they want to see happen on their lands. Quite often, we'll give those folks a suite of opportunities or things that can be done on their property, and then try to steer them to the private sector to do a more detailed forest management plan for them. On the forest, the state forest side of things, one of the things that we talked about 2 years ago is the Green Ribbon Task Force, and I guess the upside of being the first person to talk about a topic, you tend to step on everybody else's stuff. But DCNR is very much a partner organization, and I think the Green Ribbon Task Force was a good example of where multiple state agencies, the Department of Agriculture, DCNR, DCED, we had folks from academia, we had folks sitting at this very table from the industry to really look at forest product issues and trying to figure out some solutions to some of those long-term nagging problems that we've had. So this Green Ribbon Task Force was put together, and like I said, 2 years ago, it was probably a couple weeks before this very meeting that we finished a report on that, and there was a number of recommendations that came out of that. And we had broken the groups down into various categories, and the very first one was conservation. And the charge there was looking at conserving lands for the long-term sustainability of the forest product industry. There was discussion about the PILT, and thank you all, folks sitting right here, helped make that happen through legislation where the PILT, at least on state forest lands, went from $2 per acre to $6 per acre, and that's divided up, as you know, between the county, the townships, and the local school districts. But that was a recommendation within the Green Ribbon Task Force, so we tried to claim that as a very first victory, but Actually, you guys did that before we got to it. As part of that conservation and sustainability for the industry, the topic of easements, conservation easements came up, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail in a moment about that. We also talked about pests, forest pests, and I believe you mentioned the spotted lanternfly, and even though that is a great pest right now for what folks might think of as a traditional ag industry, like growing grapes and vineyards and those types of things, we also have concerns about the potential damage to Pennsylvania hardwoods. Walnut, there's a number of issues that we know a little bit about, and some other things that we need to learn a lot more about with this new invasive bug. The Department of Agriculture is the lead state agency on that, and I don't know if Wayne wants to talk about that, so I'll kind of leave that alone. We also, there was a recommendation to work with the state to work better with the Allegheny National Forest, and one of the outcomes of that was the Good Neighbor Authority, which allows state government to work more collaboratively with the federal government at the National Forest. I think I'll have Jason talk a little bit more detail about that agreement and where we are and some of the types of things that we think we can get out of that moving forward. We talked about workforce development, and again, I don't want to step on Wayne's work here, but I will say that one of the recommendations was to look at education and educating our youth about the values of forestry and also how the forests actually work and the benefits that they provide. DCNR, Department of Agriculture, and DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, has actually co-funded a position in the Department of Education that is specifically tasked at looking at school curriculum to infuse agricultural issues in the school curriculum. Now, we were really fortunate that the person that's actually selected for that job actually worked in the Bureau of State Parks in DCNR, and she was on the Green Ribbon Task Force, so she really knows. Her name's Tammy Pfeiffer. She really knows the issues that we have here. So let me just jump right down into the issue of the easements. I think that's probably one of the bigger topics that we'll probably talk about today.
Carrie has a question. Can she ask your question, Carrie?
Oh, yeah,
before,
The position that's funded by DCNR and DEP in the Department of Education, is that a new position?
Yes.
When was it?
She took that position probably 2 months ago. Yeah. And I believe I say it's a new position. It's a position, a lady by the name of Patty Vathis was in it, and it was vacated about 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah, and that job was actually, that position was lost in education, but the deal that we struck with the Department of Education is they come up with the position, the PIN number, if you will, the bureaucratic side of things, and then the three operating agencies, Department of Ag, DCNR, and DEP would end up paying for that. And DCNR is paying, we're paying our part of that position out of our oil and gas lease fund.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about conservation easements, and I would say that probably part of the discussion needs to be what is an easement and what's not an easement. And through our experience and talking with folks, there's a number of different types of conservation, or a number of types of easements that can go on properties. Some of the more traditional ones that we have seen in the past has been easements where it's protecting a particular resource, and it's much like the Ag Preservation Program, where you want to protect a particular resource. You the government pays for that right to protect that resource. So from DCNR standpoint, and I think from the Green Ribbon Task Force's standpoint, is we really want to look at protecting the long-term viability and the sustainability of the forest product industry in a way that we have traditionally we have done through state forests is we would buy fee simple lands. We own and manage 2.2 million acres of state forest lands. Part of the concern there was you take those lands off the local tax roll, even though there's a PILT, and I think some jurisdictions the PILT might be better than the tax rate, and some it's not. But the concern was you take that land off the tax base. So the easement program really kind of solves that in a way that the land stays in private ownership, much like an ag easement, and then the state pays for a specific part of that easement. So we wanted to look at opportunities where we could manage lands like state forest lands. And we manage state forest lands for the conservation side of things. We manage it for the sustainable timber operations. And we're talking about in perpetuity timber operations. And we manage it for recreation. So what we have done through this guidance from the Green Ribbon Task Force is developed an easement that the private landowner manages their timber resources in a sustainable way. And the very first one we've done like this is with Lime Timber, where they have a third-party certification that they need to go through to ensure that they're managing their forest sustainably. So that meets that first hurdle. The second hurdle is the recreation and conservation side of things, and that's what DCNR really manages quite well. So in the easement, those properties will be opened up to public access and to the John Q. Public. The land will look and feel very much like state forest lands. They'll be able to hunt on it, they'll be able to fish on it, they'll be able to ride their mountain bike, drive on specific roads, much like state forest. We have places where we allow motorized vehicles and places that we don't. Excuse me. And they'll be able to camp on it in specific locations. So it'll look and feel a lot like a state forest. The Bureau of Forestry will manage those human resources, if you will, on the land, and the responsibility for managing the natural resources, the timber resources, will be up to the landowner, and currently that landowner is Lime Timber. What did I miss, Jason?
I think you're covering it through there pretty well.
Okay. So any early questions on the easement program?
Since you brought up the easement issue,
Sure.
you know that this committee's has done a lot of work in that area, and we had a hearing in Harrisburg, and so there's been a lot of questions on that topic. Are there questions from any of the other panelists or from the members specifically on the easement issue that anyone would like to ask? I mean, specifically? Representative Wentling?
Yeah, sure. Not necessarily a question, but more of a comment. Just recently, one of the...
You might want to speak up.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I'll try to speak up the best I can. My voice is a little bit quiet or soft. But so just recently, I was approached by a member, Mary Jo Daly, and she brought to my attention the concept of conservation easements, I believe it was.
Speak up, please.
And conservation easements, and she has a bill that she's currently working on in that regard. And I actually referred her to a committee that I'm on called the Joint Legislative Conservation Committee that Senator Hutchinson's the chairman of, to take it to that committee to see if there's something the committee would want to consider at looking at that. And that may tie into, what you're talking about in regards to, easements and those kinds of things. So I just want to make a comment about that.
Thank you. There have been a lot of questions, and
Could I inquire, Marty? what
Sure,
the
go ahead,
bill
Bert.
is? What bill would that be?
I think it was she talked to me about it too. It was a member from the Southeast that.
And it's actually not conservation easements per se, it's conservation corridors, and it doesn't have a bill number that I'm aware of yet. It's out for co-sponsorship if you look up Mary Jo Daly.
And it's the whole conservation easement thing issue has brought up a lot of questions for folks because it was a recommendation in the Green Ribbon Task Force, and this committee is familiar with the ag preservation easements that have been in place for years. I think the questions that immediately came to mind were, number one, the funding mechanism for the easements with using PennVest funds. So that's one issue. And then the actual conservation easements themselves, and the fact that, number one, folks didn't know what they were, and number two, folks didn't know what was in an easement per se. I mean, until the easement's filed at the county courthouse, you don't know what's in an easement. So the thing that I've been hearing from folks is there needs to be some kind of parameters, that the state would put in place to say, if we're going to have a conservation easement, this is what should be delineated in the easement. Similar to what the ag preservation program has. There's a list of requirements that you have to meet to be able to qualify as an ag conservation easement or ag preservation easement. So I guess a question that I would have for you folks at DCNR right now, do you have a set of parameters that you're looking at, and what would your comments be for the prospects of putting some parameters in the law relative to how projects or how land would qualify to be before an easement would be placed on the land?
So to start with, I think your and some of your constituents' criticism is rightfully so. So we did not, and I'll take that heat, we did not communicate as well as we should have on what a conservation easement is and what it isn't. It's one of those things where you're so deep into a project that you just think everybody knows the same stuff that you do, and that's just not correct. So we missed that. And I think since the easement was first drafted, we've met with a number of folks, our partners, some of our critics. We've met with Pennsylvania Hardwood Council a number of times trying to figure out, kind of do a biopsy, if you will, try to figure out, what should we have done better, what can we do better moving forward, and looking at conservation easements and recreation easements on private lands. So I think that all that comments and criticisms is good stuff. It makes a program better than what it was the day before. We do have criteria, and I talk in a very broad sense is about wanting it to look and feel like state forest lands. And I think that the major things that we want to see coming out of that is total public access. And there certainly has been conservation easements in the past, and there'll probably be some in the future where there is not public access to specific areas for specific reasons, whether it's a very special resource. But the way we're looking at the conservation easements, particularly on the state forest lands, is that they're going to be opened up to the general public like any other state forest land, even though the land is owned privately. And then the second thing is, obviously, we want to see the forest, the timber managed in a very sustainable way. So this is forever. So we want, it's like state forest lands. We manage our state forests on a 120-year rotation. It's to be in perpetuity. We want to be able to provide product to the industry every year from day one on out. And we would expect that, and this is in the documents, the legal documents that are recorded along with the deed, that we expect that landowner, the private landowner that we have purchased a conservation easement from, to abide by those requirements. Like I said, in this first easement, we have a third-party organization that does looks at land management from a sustainability standpoint, and they have a rather rigorous process, much like we do in the state forests. All of our forests are certified, and we expect the private landowner to do the same thing, and that is part of that conservation easement document.
Thanks for that response. I mean, I think it's helpful to just explain to you what this appeared to be to us. It seemed like a very, very large deal with a private firm that dealt with public lands, and it was predicated on such a tiny, tiny footprint of conservation easement. That's at least what it appeared to us. And in my mind, the analogy of the equivalent is I go down to Ocean City, dip my little toe in the water and say, I know everything there is to know about the Atlantic Ocean. Well, we all know that's not true. But it was the same kind of effect, and that's why I think we were all very, very concerned about finding out more about the details of that particular deal.
Sure. So one thing I will say, that it is private land, it's not state land. So this is a private resource. We're working with a private company that owns that property.
And I stand corrected.
Okay.
But we're involving the public trust of a conservation easement, and anytime we mix public and private, everybody likes to walk away and say, well, we're partners. Well, doggone it, partner, open up your books and let me see what you're doing. I mean, it's that kind of attitude. It's like, if we're going to be partners, then doggone it, let's be absolute partners.
I think that's probably why we keep getting questions, because people see a public resource going into the easements and saying, what is the taxpayer getting for the easement? I mean, that's the question that keeps coming back. What is the taxpayer seeing? So
there was a similar question, I think, during our House budget hearing, and my response to that was, this conservation easement is about 30 cents on the dollar. So if you take an analogous, in the conservation easement with Lime Timber was actually donated, so we didn't pay a penny for that. But if we were to move forward on conservation easements, they're generally about 30 cents on the dollar. So if you take a situation where you want to buy, a 1,000-acre piece of property, you could pay full fare and buy it fee simple and pay, the full dollar, or you can do a conservation easement and get out of that conservation easement exactly what you're trying to get out of the fee simple. You're getting a sustainable forest industry, you're getting the conservation of the land, and you're getting the public access and public recreational opportunities.
All right,
go ahead, Matt.
I'll follow up on that. I know Carrie has a question as well. And I thank you for bringing up the issue. I know this is an issue that's been a big regional question, something that Chairman Causer and I have worked together on. Specifically in the Lime Timber case, I know something that really raised a red flag to a lot of folks, and it's something that crosses agencies, was the financing behind that deal. Because while it's true that the Lime Timber company is a private owner of that land purchase was only made possible by a $50 million 1% loan from Penvest, which I know for those of us who are looking at it, we thought that was water and sewer infrastructure, and all of us have boroughs and townships that have benefited greatly from Penvest loans that have been, typically a very large Penvest loan might be $10 or $12 million. So we see a private company from out of state getting a $50 million subsidized government loan that's supposed to be about water and sewer infrastructure, and then we call them a private landowner. I think that rubs a few feathers the wrong way. Now, obviously, that's not DCNR that made that decision, that's Penvest, but it does, I think the first question that I would have is, was there any discussion between Penvest and DCNR before that loan was approved? Was DCNR involved with Penvest in trying to enable the financing of that deal to happen? Do you know anything about that?
So I can tell you what I know about the Penvest deal, and it's probably about this much. So part of that was the funding came from a fund, a clean water fund, that does both gray infrastructure, but also can be used for clean water, protecting watersheds. I think that's a federally funded program that across the nation, other states have done the same thing. They have used this clean water revolving fund to conserve watershed headwaters in particular. So I think that is where the Lime deal comes into play in that particular case. As far as the loans go, my understanding is that Pinvest never has enough requests for Pinvest loans. So there's money that they have available for local communities to do either conservation work like that to protect headwaters or to do green or gray infrastructure stuff.
And I appreciate that, and obviously, we've got plenty of questions for Pinvest as well, but it's helpful. If I could just real quick, a follow-up question, or rather just on a related but different idea pertaining to conservation easements. One concern that I hear expressed in this local region very much is that it seems that we have a very uneven distribution of public lands, and I think that might be some of the largest controversy that we hear, and some of it is about on the tax rolls, but some of it is just generally the question of the differences in the nature of given areas. I've been, it's very interesting. Every once in a while you might have a friend or a relative that lives in a different part of the state that has an insight into something, and I've certainly seen there are suburban parts of the state where somebody might win an election for township supervisor on a platform of open space preservation. I don't think you quite see those same issues coming up in these areas where we've got tons of public land, tons of DCNR land, tons of open space. Up here we're looking for somebody to come use that open space to create a job. And so the question that I have is that as we're moving forward with conservation easements, will there be more I guess one concern that I have is that it's kind of, in some regard, it's determined by which private landowners come to you. And so that seems to me that there might end up being somewhat of a sampling bias as far as what opportunities come up. And what I would suggest is that there should be some criteria in place to look at the percentage of a given municipality, the percentage of a given school district or county that's already publicly owned land or conserved in some way, to make sure that we're distributing these conservation easements in places where it's going to provide for the public good, as opposed to just tacking on 15 more acres onto something that's next to 10,000 acres of already public land. Is there any discussion going that direction with the conservation easement program? And that's the end of my question. I'll hand back to Mike. Thanks.
Sure. So, frankly, we have discussions all the time about land acquisition and land management and the value that it brings to local communities. I opened up my comments talking about what value the timber industry brings to Pennsylvania. DCNR manages about 13% of the Commonwealth's forests. And I would say, I don't know the number, but I would say an equal amount, if not more, of that forest land is probably not being worked in a sustainable way like DCNR is working its public lands. So we look at DCNR as being responsible for managing our lands to support an industry that is a major part of our economy.
Can I take a stab at that as well?
Sure.
So is this on? Did I miss that? So,
Speak loud.
okay, I will. I kind of have a low tone from beginning. So a couple points to follow up on. I mean, specific to the question that you just raised, we clearly need to work on criteria for what would eventually be what we hope anyway, and what I think the vision of the Green Ribbon recommendation would be more of a program as opposed to, a transaction here and there that works with individual companies as they approach you. So hopefully I think we're looking towards that broader programmatic type of a program. And yes, the criteria you talk about is very important. I agree. There's no question that, and I fully understand the concern that many people in rural parts of this state have for economic growth, and I can see how it can be construed that a conservation easement could be counter to that. Again, that comes down to the conversation we need to have with the industry, with these communities up here. We certainly don't want to do anything that's going to inhibit any kind of future growth in these areas. And hopefully we can find ways to do that works within the program, whether that's through progressive local zoning, whether that's identifying areas that are close to towns or to transportation corridors where we don't want to apply the concept, whether it's setting a limit on a regional basis as to how much land we're willing to accept. As you mentioned earlier, the regional context around the state is much, much different. And up here, we are blessed in the heart of the Pennsylvania wilds and heading into the Allegheny National Forest to being a part of the state which, finding a forest is not an issue up here right now, that's for sure. What our concern is, as John mentioned, we have about 17 million acres of forest in Pennsylvania. About 3/4 of it is private, and that means it's not bestowed with the same long-term protection and conservation ideals that some of that public land base is. And we're simply, our concern from a conservation perspective is helping really for many values, the industry being one of them, but also the ecosystem values of that private land to be here for perpetuity, if possible, into the future. So thank you for the question on that, and it's certainly a conversation we're looking forward to having. I believe when we started the session, part of your initial question was how are we reaching out and talking with people? We've been afforded the opportunity to brief the Pennsylvania Forest Products Association Board of Directors on easements here back in March. That's one step we've taken thus far through the Forest Products Association and their director Ryder. We've been attending the statewide breakfast briefings to talk more to individual members about that and hear what they have to say about that as well. And I think we're certainly aware that we're going to have some more work to do to come up with a model that I think everybody's comfortable with. At the end of the day, that's where we have to get to.
Well, thank you for the response, and thank you, Representative Gobbler, for raising those issues, because I think it does get to the heart of what a lot of folks in this region are thinking when they look at counties like Elk that have, I don't know what percentage of public land, but I represent Cameron County, and 60% of Cameron County is owned by the Commonwealth. 60%. The county is under 5,000 now in population. It's the smallest in the state. I've got townships larger in population than Cameron County. So it becomes an issue of survival for some of these local communities. So you've got that, and Potter is over 50% public land. So people are asking themselves, in this whole discussion, when is enough enough? And so they see the discussion about conservation easements as just one more step. So maybe the Commonwealth doesn't own it, but the Commonwealth in many ways controls it, and what's going to happen to it down the road. So that's why the discussion's coming back to us. If we're going to have conservation easements, make sure that there are definitive guidelines to, how this is going to be done and quite frankly, where it's going to be done. Because if you go put a conservation easement in the southern part of the state, probably no one's going to object to that if you have the money to buy it. They probably won't, depending on where it's at. But definitely in this area, that's been an issue. When we had our hearing before, one of the issues that was discussed was the fact that it was necessary due to parcelization. That became a big issue. Well, there are folks that reached out to the county planning offices in all the counties up here to get the statistics on parcelization, and they were very low. Now, I know the department says that down the road they fear that there's going to be more parcelization, but at this point, that doesn't appear to be the case. So that's part of the discussion also. And I do think that we need to have more discussion, especially when some sort of public resource is going into the discussion, such as Penvest, for example. And even that particular deal, there's a conservation easement on part of it. Well, I know that you have an option to purchase more easements on another portion of that. I think like 50,000 acres, for example, that the department can purchase easement on down the road should you choose. I think over a 7-year period. Is that correct? Is that right? So that's what raises a lot of these questions. Carrie, did you have a follow-up?
My question was about, my recollection was that it was about 60,000 acres of the Lime situation, and that the donation of an easement was on less than 10,000 acres. Is that correct?
Yeah, the donation was, I think it's 9,400 acres, and also, and this is part of the Penvest deal, was they had to do some acid mine work So they're doing, I think it was like $750,000 worth of abandoned mine cleanup to clean up some waterways.
They do have parts of that completed, correct?
That I'm not sure about.
So the conversations with the gentleman from Line Timber, he said, already finished.
Senator Hutchinson?
Just to weigh in and say that ultimately, the strength of our country is about private property ownership. And in this case, we were talking about government picking winners and losers. And why, if somebody else wants to purchase or already has purchased timberland, why do they not get a benefit of an infusion of government money on top of that? You know, in who gets chosen is the big question. And so it's deeper than sections of the state. It's about the basic principle of who owns land and why and what you're going to do with it in the long term. And I think, although I do believe that today DCNR is doing a good job of managing their land, but it's still at the whim of government, 30, 40 years from now. We don't know how it's going to be managed. And we have an example right here in our backyard, which is the Allegheny National Forest, which was acquired under one set of understanding, and today is not necessarily following that understanding. So government can change by whims, but being undergirded by a private ownership of property in the long run, I think, is the best way to manage land. And so I'm not sitting here saying that we should have any of these. I don't care if it's in the southeast. I don't care if it's in the southwest, northwest. I just think there's a basic philosophical problem with doing these conservation easements like this. So.
On this specific topic?
On this topic, before moving on,
Might I suggest one quick alibi? And I will keep it very short because it's beyond the scope of this committee, but I feel obligated to say it since we have DCNR here. The other concern that I hear locally pertaining to the growth of public lands is certain forms of recreation which are incompatible with public ownership. And I do know that there are some efforts underway to try to deal with that and expand that, but I'm hearing a lot of appetite locally for more ATV opportunities, which in many ways is incompatible with most of the ways in which state forests and conservation easements would be managed. So to the extent that we could at least toss out there as another nugget in this conversation, obviously beyond the scope of the Ag Committee, and for that I apologize, but I think another aspect of this is people are looking, and since tourism was mentioned as well as the #2 industry in the state, ATV opportunities I think are exceptionally important as well and need to be considered as part of the question as to how we manage the availability of lands going forward. And I hope that doesn't lead into a rabbit hole, but I felt it was important to throw into the conversation. Thank you.
I was going to say ATV use usually brings up a lot more questions.
Well, I'd like to have a conversation about that at some point. You and I have had that on the floor. My question would be liability, some of the questions about that. I'm not sure I know enough about it to speak to that, but one of the thoughts that I had in one of your comments was about property management plans, helping landowners manage their property. When we think about dollars and cents investing into certain parts of programs across the state, my question would be, would there be better use of money to help educate private landowners and use the same amount of money? Like, how much educating could we get done with property management plans, and they would still own the property and all the resources on it? But dollar for dollar, I wonder what that would do in the long run for us. But
Isn't there currently a forest stewardship program that would be similar to what Clint had just mentioned?
Yeah, we do in the Bureau of Forestry work with all of our forest land in the state. Of course, we own 2.2 million acres, but we're also pretty directly engaged with the private land resource where we can as well. We offer technical assistance. The forest stewardship plan was a previous iteration of the program. A lot of that is falling under NRCS presently to provide assistance plans to private landowners. Again, we're always interested in talking to people about how to manage their private forest land resource for the best outcomes possible. Going back to the previous comments about private land ownership, and I think we haven't talked about it, but we need to acknowledge that government's only half of the equation there. The private landowner and what they care to do with their land is really the primary consideration when it comes to working on someone else's land and trying to assist them to do the best we can to meet their goals in as responsible of a way as we possibly can. And obviously different landowners own land for totally different reasons. So we work with them as we can.
Are there any other questions? Any other questions on this topic?
Yes, if you don't mind.
No, please.
So far, the conversation has been pretty much between legislators and DCNR, which is a Harrisburg conversation. If I can interject more of a local level.
Are we supposed to take offense to that?
No, not a bit. It's a compliment. It's nice to see.
We don't, by the way.
It reassures us the government is working. But since you did make the effort to come up here, allow me as a local forester land manager to share some of the concerns that I hear on the landscape regarding conservation easements. There is a concern that it may be a second land grab, similar to what we had 100 years ago when the state started to acquire land. And the reason for it was an economic reason. The area was depressed, the lands weren't functional, and the state nurtured them to what they are today, as well as the national forest. We won't get into the debate that Senator Hutchinson brought up about the National Forest Management, but there was a wonderful job to produce a very mature forest, and that's another discussion. But as we talk about conservation easements on a local level, the concerns are, and I'm only sharing with you the concerns I hear locally. The $50 million Penvest loan, based on the 61,000 acres acquired, is an average cost of about $820 an acre. It's not a lot different than what the Conservation Fund paid for the land they acquired in Sargent Township just a few years ago. So there's a fear. People from rural Pennsylvania, I hate to tell you, kind of fear government. And they're afraid that there's a motion going on to grab this land because of the close proximity of those values. The gift of the conservation easement was a great thing. It was done in a rural part of a rural county, and the locals are concerned, wait a minute, for the past 30 years that land was leased, and the owner was able to pay their property taxes through the lease payment from the recreationalists that leased the land for recreation. If it's open to the public, that means that revenue stream is gone. What is the value of that land when it changes ownership? Will it sell instead of $800 or $1,000 an acre? Will it sell for 50 or 100 because of the inability to do anything but grow trees? What is that value? And we'll determine that in the future. But what happens if that value is challenged at the assessment office and the assessment is lowered? That need for local revenue to the township, the county, and the school district will be passed on to the remaining taxpayers. That's a concern that local people share with us. That's an unknown. I think it's an unknown that could be overcome if people participated if locals had some participation in the writing of the easement. That's possible. The other concern is that there was an easement done in Elk County a decade ago that the land is posted. So what did the locals get for that easement? It was leased and posted. There's concern about that. It's not spoken about a lot, but I hear it. So I share that with you. As we move forward, we really need to have a dialogue. If this is going to happen, there needs to be a public education of the public, the local communities, to truly understand it, so there isn't animosities among neighbors, whether it's industry or whether it's private citizens. And those are the issues that we need to address locally. It's truly a concern, the use of public money for private enterprise. It's unprecedented. It might be a neat idea, but we need to educate people to the positive side so we can answer the complex questions that come out at the backside. That's what we're hearing locally.
Well, I think, just to add on to that, not only have them, educate them, but allow them to participate. I mean, if you're going to have conservation easements or any other thing that impacts their ability to run their townships or their communities, they should have an opportunity to have input into that, not just be informed of it, because it really doesn't change anything if they just know it. I mean, but they should know it, but they all should have the opportunity to participate in it. I think industry should have a seat at the table so that they understand what that really means to them. Because it seems subjective. It seems like it's been subjective in the past, that you're trying to protect a working forest, but a working forest means different things to different people. So, you know, if you're at the table and you're participating in the discussion, at least you have that opportunity to make sure that those values are protected.
Zimmerman?
Well, I appreciate some of those comments, Ken, and Jason, some of your comments on the need for clearer policy on an easement. My question would be, how solid are the easements going into the future? I know some of the easements on farmland are pretty solid and have held up over many years, but I'd be interested in actually seeing what that easement looks like, what's in it. And the idea that there's kind of policy established that they can't just change at a whim somewhere down the road, because it does impact, you know, your local municipalities, people that live in those local areas. So I don't know if those easements are available for the public or not, but. Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing those and just see how solid they are. But I would like to see, you know, some established policy going forward on if this is the kind of the route we're going to be going with some of the timberlands. So, and you know, and the idea that today, you know, you can timber these, and you know, you're working with local or with the industry, with business related to forest products and all. But let's say there comes a time when that goes away, then what do our forests look like? So that's the reason I think we need more solid policy here. So, good conversation. Thank you.
So, Carrie, there is a statute that authorizes an easement.
Correct.
We discussed that. Oh, you've got a copy. She's got everything. What statute authorizes the easement?
It's called the Conservation and Preservation Easements Act. It's Act 29 of 2001. And it generally provides for conservation easements and preservation easements, which are two different defined terms.
But I understand it's broad. It's
Yes,
rather
it's
broad.
fairly broad.
But that is the legal justification for having an easement in place.
Well, I think that anybody, even prior to this act, I think as a landowner, I could probably have filed an easement in the courthouse on my own land even prior to this. An easement, I guess, by definition is held by a third party. I guess maybe what I'm thinking of is just a restriction, a deed restriction. You know, any landowner can put a deed restriction by filing it in the courthouse, and although I'm not sure how it would hold up for the future when the land is conveyed, I think there certainly has been litigation in that regard. I'm also not familiar with any litigation, if any even exists, of the transfer of property that has one of these kinds of easements on it. I'm not aware of any.
What do you, since that was Act 29 of 2001,
Yes.
it's only 18 years old, and with many things that we do, and creating statute, we always have to go back and revisit and touch up that sort of thing. Do we have any idea of how many easements have been put into place, how many, anything like that? Any kind of review of how it's worked out? I think that gets to more what Representative Zimmerman was mentioning.
This is not a statewide program. It's
Okay.
not something, like, we know how many easements are held for our statewide farmland preservation program.
Right.
These can be privately held, so no idea.
Yeah, there's no registry.
No. I guess there could be some sort of an evaluation at each courthouse, you know, you go through records and see what's there, but.
I think Destiny just put her hand up to go around and check that out.
So one step further than that, we've talked here today about how there should be some parameters. There should be public involvement. There should be input into these. I guess what I'm asking for is we sort of need to know what should those parameters be. We need some input from you folks, from anyone who was willing to offer it on what those parameters should be. Should it, and you brought up several of them, John, the open for hunting. That's probably one of the biggest things that I hear from folks is the land open for hunting? And, so if there seems to be there does need to be some parameters in there, and what should those be? And I would appreciate any input that you folks can provide, to us as to what maybe those parameters should be.
We can provide you a copy of the easement and also the infrastructure management plan that is, they're very detailed documents that talk about the types of things that I think you're.
I read it. I think the easement that we're talking about is about 85 pages or something like that. It was, I did read a copy of it. And I'll share it with the committee members. So.
I mean, I'm sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
I think from the listening session that PFPA, the Pennsylvania Forest Products Association, and the council had with DCNR over this, one of the biggest parameters that we have is the clear definition of what a working forest is, because that can vary from one landowner to the next, which may or may not include harvesting trees for the timber resource. And I think in general, the industry was supportive of working forest easements in areas that are under pressure. And I noticed that DCNR just had another, I assume you were involved, I'm not sure, but announced an easement, conservation easement of a Girl Scout camp in Montgomery County of 400 to 600 acres. Again, as I looked at that, I didn't see that it was actually a working forest easement at all. It was funded, I believe, through other sources, not necessarily DCNR. But those kinds of things are happening. But we're certainly, from what I heard from the industry, saying working forest easements, the definition that we want to make sure is allowing forestry to occur, meaning cutting of trees for the timber resource, as well as for sustainable forestry, as well as wildlife habitat, for all the other issues, but to be able to, for that landowner to be able to access that timber.
I mean, it sounds like to me like some definitions need to be tightened up, to be honest with you, and some parameters. That's what it looks like to me, so thank you for that. Mark? Speak up, brother.
I'll try. We might be talking about maybe two different things, though, too, because one of the words that were mentioned earlier was fee simple, which means actual ownership, versus easements, which are basically leases, restrictions, and things like that, and you get into third parties. So that's something that needs to be understood here, too. the underlying owner may be a private owner, and then there's some kind of easement that's been conveyed with or without the ability to timber the property, and how it's going to be used, either posted or not, or ATV use. So that's a whole nother, that's a kind of apples and oranges, and that needs to be understood here too, is easements versus fee simple, which you mean you own the property. And then, I don't know, you mentioned, we've been talking about the Penvest property. I think you'd mentioned that was actually purchase and fee, correct, with the Penvest money?
Penvest loan that went to
Loan.
Lime.
Right,
Property and fee.
correct. So they own it and they control it, and it's their property, period. And when they say their, yeah, I mean, so they would set those parameters through any kind of easement they determine.
I don't think the purchase price of that, and I don't down the lime hole, but rabbit hole here, but that purchase price included additional funding beyond simply the loan that they secured there. And I guess I would take a moment here just to point out, we've had conversation here the last few minutes about, what an easement is. So it's a legal agreement, just to be clear, and it's a legal agreement that's recorded with the deed. It conveys generally development or subdivision rights to either an NGO or a governmental organization that holds the easement, and they are for perpetuity. They apply to both present and future owners down the road. So,
And that can be limited though, too. You can set parameters for 99 years, 30 years, too. Those can be built into the easement.
And to be clear, I think what we're mostly talking about is an easement that will be placed using state resources. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because
Absolutely,
to
yeah.
what Carrie had said, a private landowner can put an easement on their property at their discretion, with the terms of the easement being whatever they negotiate or whatever they choose. But I think there's a difference when there's a public resource that was used to purchase the easement. That's just like the ag easements have parameters.
yeah, and the ag easements is maybe an example of a more programmatic approach to it, where it's a program that's available to anyone who wants to try to apply, and if they meet the criteria with the property and things work out for them, they can enter into the program. It's that choice on the private landowner's part to enter into that program. Yep, understand.
Are there other questions?
Regarding this specifically?
This topic?
Okay.
Wait, there's more topics?
I got a lot of questions.
I know that folks from the industry had other topics that they wanted to talk about. I'd certainly be glad to. I didn't plan for this meeting to be consumed with conservation easements, so I want to give you the opportunity to talk about those other topics also.
One topic that I wanted to bring up is conservation easements is a topic that needs further discussion and will go on for some time, and I think we've identified that. The one thing I wanted to briefly bring up, and very briefly, is to commend this committee of raising the awareness that forestry is agriculture too. Since 2 years ago when you had your first field hearing in Bradford, the Chairman Cowser and Minority Chairman Eddie De Franceschi have carried that ball forward to the point that Secretary Redding had made the forestry a big part of the farm show this year. We were able to invite foresters to address audiences within the farm show. That I think we've made great headway in recognizing that forestry is agriculture too, and I think that's a message we have to continue to carry forward. It's an easy message to carry. I commend you for identifying that and carrying that message, and it's remarkable because I think the first positive part, like John had mentioned earlier, that the forestry task force, you raised the PILT payment before the recommendation came out of the task force. But one thing that did happen immediately upon the completion of the task force is you identified that forestry is agriculture too, and forestry sales tax exemption was huge. I think Representative Gabler, you carried that forward, and that was an amazing part, especially for an industry that's challenged. So I commend you for that. And as we move forward and address these easements, I think we need to remember forestry is agriculture too, because in your agricultural easements, there is a disconnect because farmers in the southeast and where they have a lot of those agricultural easements are able to use their ag equipment to access their annual crops, whether it be corn or soybeans or whatever. But it seems that the inconsistent and non-uniform treatment of forestry among local municipalities tends to inhibit forestry in southeast, and those of you like from Lebanon County have to experience that. I know the Game Commission and the DCNR who have lands in those areas experience that, and I fear as a land manager that could have creep, because if we don't educate our public that forestry is agriculture too in a consistent way, people will turn a negative perspective to forestry, because many people believe forests are a stagnant or static entity because they don't change that much from week to week. Right. But they do. Right. And we need to manage those. We need to have the access to manage those. So as we carry that message of forestry being agriculture too, if we could remember that and make those adjustments, because as we discuss conservation easements, the agricultural easement needs to be discussed too, to identify forestry as an access point to be able to get those products to market. The other point that I think we need to discuss, and it's almost at a critical point, we brought this up at the Forestry Task Force, but that is the workers' compensation issue for loggers and logger recruitment. I can refer to Eddie as my friend because the day that I told him a logger could make 6 figures, he said, "Why aren't we helping these people?" and quite honestly, it goes back to that sales tax issue. The way we were able to help the loggers with the sales tax issue, a group of us went to them on the Logger Safety Day, sat down with the group, heard their plight, and were able to do something. Loggers are loggers for a reason. We foresters are foresters for a reason. I don't really like having to carry the forestry message, but you have no choice, somebody has to. And loggers tend to be very introverted people, and to try to get their feelings out, they're not going to do it. They're going to go into a cocoon and do their job day to day in spite of it all and take the risk. So what we have to do is truly reach out and find a way to cure this, because the loggers are the first line of our forest products industry. And if we can't harvest the trees effectively and efficiently, we aren't going to have a forest products industry. And there's different ways to address it, and I'm sure my peers here at the table will share some of the ways. But my concern is, as a forest manager, a lot of what our company has to do is what I call boutique forestry, and that's remediation forestry after somebody went in and took the best, and we have to kind of fix it. Somebody takes all the vegetables out of the garden without weeding it, and our job is to go back in and get that vegetable garden growing. The forest has to be in a positive way. So when it's been mismanaged in the past, we have to use tools that we have available. What we showed you 2 years ago, some of them pretty aggressive, but sometimes it takes an aggressive action to fix something. It's not a lot different than a doctor taking an aggressive action to a cancer. If a forest is in really disrepair, we have to be aggressive. So the point I'm making is to do that, practice that boutique forestry, we have 8 logging crews that we contract with that do that for us. Of those 8 crews, 2 of them carry workers' compensation. The other 6 operate as sole proprietors to try to avoid paying compensation, which they do. Of those 6, 2 of them are under the age of 60 years old. What's our logging future? This is a critical issue that needs addressed immediately. That's a discussion that we need to carry forward. That's just to get the workers' comp issue started. So take the ball, Bert.
Now, what prompted you to bring my name to the table?
You're going to give us the solution that the Amish are the answer.
there's the elephant in the room. But anyway, I think after our meeting 2 years ago, we actually put a lot of time and effort into trying to come up with a solution that would address that workers' compensation. And we, with the help of DCNR and this committee and a whole lot of other people at the state level, we met with just about any agency or individual that had any responsibility or could have any input. And we pretty much learned everything that we couldn't do. And there were a lot of those things. I mean, we thought we were really thinking out of the box and coming up with some innovative solutions, and they really pretty much shot them down over and over again. So what it came down to and where we're at right now with this is maybe a public-private partnership to form a group. The state basically says we don't have the data that we need to reduce the rates, and until we get that data in the form of from the industry and from a group that they would recognize, they won't make any changes. So if we came up with this public-private partnership that would then form this group, and the group would have pretty significant safety controls on it. It would be voluntary, but it would be a sizable enough group that we could get that data from. We could hopefully get enough participation, and then after 2 years, 3 years, we would have enough data to then reduce the rates overall. Right now, like Ken said, the majority of the logging community is working without workers' comp, and they're paying zero for it. When we started this, the rate from the state was $54 on the 100. So even if we got that down to, say, 20, with this fund, this group we would offset their rate to bring it down. So if we can even get it down to the $25, $20 rate, we're still going to have a certain level of resistance to that because it's $25 is still a lot more than zero. But ultimately, if we can get that participation and get new people into the logging industry, we have the opportunity to move the industry forward. If we don't, we'll continue like this, and when those 60 and 70-year-olds retire, there won't be a logging force to take up the mantle from there. The other issue is, right now we have a growing Amish logging population, and that puts them at an entirely different level. So there's that the competition there. As that grows, the pressure on regular loggers to be able to compete with that is going to be even a bigger challenge. So it's really not an easy fix, but it does seem like this is as close as we've ever gotten, and we've really done a lot of background. Bob Kirchner's here. He's actually done a lot of the understanding work, knowing the insurance industry, and as we went through all of these different agencies, it was really beneficial to have Bob there because he knew what they were talking about, and it was a lot harder for them to just say no because he could challenge them. But ultimately, we have to have this data, and we have to be able to get enough people who are willing to take that chance for 3 years and be safe and move it forward. I think that I'm hoping that with enough support from the sawmill community to support their loggers to do that, that we could come up with a group and we could have it work, but I don't know. And that public-private partnership was actually a suggestion. I'm not sure if it came from the legislature or from one of the agencies, but or maybe it was even the HDC, but if we could get, and I don't want to throw out the number, but there was a number that would be public funded, and then.
I'll throw it out.
Okay, I'll defer to Wayne for that.
Just real quick, a perspective, just, could you give us the comparison numbers, New York versus Pennsylvania, so that everyone gets a feel that, what's the workers' comp rate in New York versus Pennsylvania?
$17.100 in New York State, and it's 50-some in Pennsylvania.
Although recently reduced in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Is
it like to 48, maybe?
I think it came down to 46 or 48, Department of Labor just
Is that the very challenge it's talking about between the Amish and what we would call the English? The English.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that the Amish are not participating in workman's comp? Is that the difference?
No, sir, that's not a completely true statement.
Okay.
The majority of the English are not participating in workman's comp.
Oh.
They're sole proprietor.
Okay, I see.
However.
So then maybe I'm not understanding. What's the challenge of having Amish?
So I think I can answer that. So Northwest Hardwoods requires all of their contractors to carry workers' comp. Even sole proprietors.
Okay.
We make them carry workers' comp. They have to elect to carry workers' comp. Now, we compete against other companies that use Amish labor that don't carry workers' comp. And so our cost is much higher. Our logging cost is much higher because we have to compensate our contractors for the fact that they have to pay for workers' comp.
Is it a mandate that or is that your choice that you?
Our insurance companies say if we don't require our contractors to carry workers' comp, they become deemed employees. And if they get hurt, then it's our risk.
And so the Amish they're not insured?
They're not.
So they don't do it insurance.
They have
and that's the reason why they can.
Religious exemption.
Okay, I got it. Now I get it.
There's another caveat in there, workers' comp. Many of the people who carry workers' comp incorporate themselves, and the corporation is owned by a spouse or someone that's not out in the woods doing the work.
Right.
So the person out in the woods doing the work pays themselves a very low rate, so they can afford to carry workers' comp.
Right.
The downside of that is a real moral question. If that person out in the woods that's doing the work, that's generating the revenue, gets hurt, their compensation rate's very low, and the income stream to that household dries up. And I'll give you a personal experience. We had a logger that had workers' comp. He was a corporation. His wife was the principal, so we paid the corporation. The wife took the bulk of the salary as the income from the corporation as the executive. The logger who did the work paid a minimal salary. He had a fatal accident in the woods where he was greasing his skidder and the skidder broke loose and ran over and crushed him. Fatal accident. Workers' comp paid $13,500 life insurance. Not nearly enough for a man that brought home six figures. So that's a moral question. So we're really pushing not only the business, but it's moral.
So tell me why they would structure it like that. If the guy's bringing home six figures, why is he not actually collecting the six figures?
Because if he collected the six figures, he would pay the $50
per hundred. Okay. All right.
Salary versus.
Got it.
So
okay.
the wife is a clerical salary at like 3 or 4%, and he's the logger, the labor at 55%. So you see the moral question?
I got it. It's any system we set up. Somebody figures out a way to. Well, this is the best way. I get it. Okay.
Bring the most money home, and it's great until the tragedy occurs.
Right. So you've cleared up my Amish versus English logger issue here, because I was having a hard time figuring out what the deal was there. So.
Chairman Kaczynski.
Can we stay with this? So we have a couple components here that I'm not sure how they're interacting. So number one, how does New York, how are they able to function appropriately and pay the workers' comp at the rate necessary to be able to maintain their living standards at $17 as opposed to our 54? Is it because we do not have enough people paying into our system, and as a result?
That's part of it.
Okay. Now, is that the role that the Amish plays within that industry? Is that what?
No.
No?
I don't think so. In New York State, you are mandated to have workers' comp. In Pennsylvania, because of the sole proprietorship, you're not. As long as you're self-employed, you don't have to have it. So in Pennsylvania, very few are actually covered. So that gets to your point about not having enough in the pool. And then you have an industry that is dangerous. So chances are the accidents are severe, whether they are fatalities or worse, in some cases, a lifelong injury that costs millions and millions of dollars.
I mean, the insurance business does not work unless the pool is large enough to pay for the catastrophic incidents.
Exactly.
And it appears that our pool is not large enough.
Right.
And do you have any other avenues that you feel we can ascertain in order to expand that pool?
I'll speak to that.
Go ahead.
And, no, if you got it,
No,
if you
go
got
ahead.
it. You know, when I go to work every day, they explain my job to me, and it's simple. Make my accounts receivable as high as possible and my accounts payable as low as possible. So I and the others that in our industry are going to strive all the time to get the lowest rates possible for the logs that are extracted from the woods. Chris's company is probably admirable in requiring it, but do not be deceived. They're wanting to keep their more of a corporation type of exposure, and they're wanting to keep their liability and their exposure minimized. All of us are driven for what is in the best financial need. There's very few times that you'll ever hear Bert Craig say that this is a problem that if the government got involved in, it would make it better for us. But this may actually be one of those. So if as this develops, and what you're going to hear, I think, is people like John and Dave saying, if you want to come log on state lands, we're going to require workers' comp. That is probably one of the first steps. You're going to hear maybe certain TMOs make steps that say, if you want to log on our lands, we're going to require workers' comp. Because as we try to promote wanting to see workers' comp grow, that's one way that we could do it. And then Ken kind of stole my thunder, because one of the things that I was going to say was, who's going to administrate the Berts of the world that are trying to figure out how I keep my costs as low as possible? And so if I'm able to get an Amish crew, or if I'm able to have 5 people on a job and they're all sole proprietors, and the regulations and laws of the state prohibit you from requiring workers' comp on anybody of that status. So at some point, there's going to have to, as this grows with industry partnering in a voluntary capacity, at some point, how that's administrated through law is going to become more and more part of your responsibility.
Well, you all have to play a role in helping us design that law. And what I'm seeing here is we have a $17 billion industry that appears to be in jeopardy because we do not have a youthful lumber force. We're trying to find ways to encourage people to engage in an extremely dangerous vocation where injuries are highly likely and absence of the job may be prolific for a period of time without any money coming in. So I think everybody at this table needs to sit down and give a little in order to be able to preserve that $17 billion. And what I'm referring to is, if the government can help save this industry or preserve it by coming up with X amount of dollars to help put in the pool And the businesses can also play a role by putting in maybe a little less of your, putting in a little bit of your profit into that pool to help get everybody on board so that everybody actually would pay into, out of those 6 companies that are not paying in. You see where I'm going. So I think, and again, working with Chairman Causer, we're always willing to figure out what we need to do for the betterment of ag, what we need to do for the betterment of the timber industry. So our doors are open. We just need a little help from you guys in guiding us on what direction we can take.
Where we are at this point with this process. First off, the group of people that have been involved have just done an excellent job. But we have developed sort of a plan that's just a straw man kind of a concept at this point, nothing definite. But the proposal is that because of those different rates, and one thing that we haven't mentioned that I understand is anyone who has a chainsaw accident, cutting down the tree in your backyard, when that goes to the emergency room and gets reported, that actually affects the rates for the loggers for their workers' comp because it's a chainsaw accident. So one of the things we're doing with SFI, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, is doing a lot more chainsaw safety training with the general public and recreational person and firewood person, whoever doing logs, not just the loggers. But back to the plan. The plan currently is that we're putting out a proposal that we would have a $2.5 million donation allotment from state government over the course of 3 years, so $2.5 million each year. And then hoping we could get a tax credit and or direct donations from industry, the sawmill owners, to underwrite that the other $2.5 million coming from the private sector. So that over the course of the 3 years, we would then have $15 million, but we would immediately start to enroll people on a voluntary basis for those who wanted to take workers' comp, with the goal that reducing from the 55 or the 48, whatever it is now, getting it down closer to 2025, closer to the New York rate, that we could subsidize and allow voluntary participation. But the probability would be that after the 3 years, or at some date designated into the future, the probability is we are going to have to put some sort of incentive such as DCNR saying if you're going to work on state land, and also companies saying if you're going to work for us, Northwest and Lime Timber also all require that workers' comp. But they are the exception overall. Most companies are not, and they're working with independent contractors who are not insured at this time. So hoping that they will contribute and participate, but after the 3 years, we're hoping that that would be funded through the state insurance fund, state workers insurance fund. Then after those 3 years, hopefully we'd have a fairly good safety record established. We won't have had catastrophic losses in that time. So there would be a pot of funds that would be available that we could attract a private insurer, such as is occurring in New York, that funds their program, so that we could get a private insurance program that would be completely funded by themselves.
And this $15 million would be sufficient to do that?
That's the estimate that Mr. Kirshner, I believe, had provided to us.
On the back of an envelope.
But he's our expert in the insurance field. The goal then also is that would also have an accountable safety program, and that at some point it would have to become mandatory, if not done through the industry and the state requiring it, to a level that it would be involved.
And that would also benefit those companies that are paying the workman's comp, because it would reduce the workman's comp.
True.
Okay.
So the state, so if somebody logs for the state now, they don't have to have, they're not required to have workman's comp. You can hire a sole proprietor as well.
They are required to be SFI certified or trained.
That's not
correct? That has nothing to do with workers' comp.
Right. Even our loggers who are sole proprietors, if they have workers' comp, it's only insured by the contract relationship of the insurance policy, not by the law, because in Pennsylvania, a sole proprietor or partner is not required to have workers' comp. So it takes it to one more step of moral liability, or not, I don't want to use moral liability, but moral code. And that is, many of those guys choose to work alone now because they don't want to pay workers' comp. Right? So now you're putting a logger out there in one of the most dangerous jobs, working alone. And many of them choose to do that, many.
Our next step in this process, I actually have a conference call on Tuesday next week with some of the key partners involved in this, is to do some sort of a meeting or survey or visit directly to the sawmills owners and senior management, and to especially the loggers. Loggers, I'm told, are sort of like independent folks out there, and if they take a day to come to a meeting like this, poor Ken doesn't get paid for today because he's a logger, and so he's not making any income today.
Foresters don't either.
In that sense.
But you're safe.
But so we're trying to figure out how to get loggers to come together to get some buy-in from them, to see really what their interest is. Now, none of them are really going to be interested because it doesn't cost them anything now, and even if we offer $17 or $20, which is a great program, they're not going to be thrilled. But we're wanting to do some survey work with the loggers to really make them look at this issue, as well as with the sawmills, who are being fortunate so far that they've not had a major lawsuit against them, and the definition of employee and self-employed in the whole situation.
And what,
so go ahead.
Well, one final thing, if I could encourage DCNR and Wayne to engage in conversation, let alone regarding Restore PA. If we're able to pass that, certainly you could get a piece of that $4.5 billion. And I think you should put a stake in there right now and say this would help us tremendously. So we need to continue to gather the right information. Because, you know, in state government, you never have enough money for all the things you need. That's just a fact. So we're always throwing balls up in the air, trying to figure out which ones get the most important aspect of it all, try to balance it out. This could be a new source of dollars that could maybe help that industry. I'm just saying.
I think that 4.5's been spent over and over and over.
Well, make sure they get a piece of that. Make sure you get a piece of that.
Can I just
wait a minute? Where are you spending it?
I'm not an insurance guy, and I've never been on a labor industry. So the workers' comp providers, whoever that is, do they not pool labor markets together? Like, is this not coming to all the same pool that would provide workman's comp for a trucker or the garbage guy, or I mean, it's all different pools. Why? Because as Chairman Pashinski said, the bigger the pool, the better off you are. So why aren't the providers pooling this with, or is this so dangerous and so expensive? When
occupation has its own category.
Its own category.
So our category is logging and lumbering, which has a very high experience modification or a very poor experience modification. So that's the problem. So each category has its own rate based on the dangers, the amount of danger in the occupation, so to speak. So in this case, the experience has not been good.
So then a logical conclusion then is that because of
New York and Pennsylvania being that different rate is because the providers don't work across state lines. No?
Two different things.
Regulated by two different insurance departments.
Yes.
Yeah, regulated by two different insurance
Different regulations.
Okay.
So the other really important side of this is what Wayne started to mention about the safety program. So we're talking about keeping people, having an insurance fund when they get hurt, what we really need to focus on is keeping them safe so they
Right,
don't get
absolutely,
hurt,
yeah.
right? So some tax incentive for a logger or something that carries some amount of safety training and some safety training program is critical. We've got to keep these guys safe. There aren't, you mentioned it, there aren't very many that want to get in this business because it's dangerous, right? So we need to make sure that we're training these guys to stay safe. And it has to be not only training them, but enforcing that training, some sort of enforcement that there is some on-the-site oversight of are they being safe or not in their occupation. So
That's what occurs in New York. It's an accountable insurance
And
or
so-
safety program, so that they go out and check in the woods, and if you're not wearing your hard hat, now you have a fine.
Sort of like the mining folks from the federal government, if you do it.
But right now, a private insurance carriers don't have to provide insurance for loggers, and they choose not to. So until we get that critical mass and that rate at a level that makes sense for a private insurance carrier then to come in, but right now they're really not interested.
Thank you.
I wanted to the discussion about requiring workers' comp coverage for those who might work on state lands, or for example. How would we police the setting up of businesses, as was mentioned earlier, where technically the person working in the woods is covered, but it's at a very low rate because of the way they structured their business? How would we, if we're going to say you must have coverage to either work for a company or to cut on state land, how do we then say you have to have, would we have to say you have to have this much coverage, or how would we structure
I think that rather than structure it like that, if we get the rate down to a place where people can afford to have it, that should help offset that. I mean, if they can actually be covered for what they should be covered for and afford that, then that kind of goes away, hopefully. But if you do
But to get them to
require-
buy in the first place, how do we, what's?
That's why we almost, it seems we're at the point where we have to offset that. We have to subsidize that rate to get it down to the place where.
I mean, I guess
they can
we're,
come in, but-
if we're even subsidizing half, it's still a lot more than zero. I mean, so what is the?
I think the incentive, Scott, is similar to us. Every one of us at this table probably has some degree of life insurance. True? And the loggers know every day they go to work, they don't have that insurance. So they're willing to pay, I think anyone that's reasonable is willing to pay something for that protection, similar to what we would be willing to pay in life insurance. And the degree that we would pay varies by our own situation and our own vision and our own thought process. But I don't think any of them are really comfortable going out there knowing that they don't have any. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Thanks.
But I also want to say that, you know, Eddie, you make a great point in you know, the awareness and getting people involved in recruitment. And again, I'll go back to my argument of forestry is agriculture too. Many of you introduced yourselves of growing up on a dairy farm. And we know that those that are involved in dairy grew up there and were exposed to it at a young age. And we have to work within the Commonwealth and with our federal friends to try to expose people to the industry at a much younger age, because the intrigue of the forest, the intrigue of logging, the intrigue of equipment comes at an adolescent age, not at a mature age. And it's similar to dairy farming. A kid gets a passion for dairy farming when he's a youthful, you know, when they're youthful. And getting a passion for logging comes at the same time. So we have to, through education in that position that Carrie spoke of, 30 years as a school director, I saw that in students. that once if you hooked them in and they were interested at 12, 13 years old, they had that interest for life. And we need to have that opportunity. And that becomes more difficult as we see the issues facing us nationally with these tariffs and whatnot. So we also have to reach out to our federal government to work together to bring those things together that forestry is agriculture to.
Well, again, $17 billion is something that you don't want to sneeze at. No. Also, imagine a job where you're getting 6 figures. I think that alone would entice some people, but I think it's going to start where the industry is, because people understand it, and now we try to promote that. I mean, you don't become all of a sudden a kid doesn't wake up and say, I'm going to become a dairy farmer. You know, it's through years and generations of loving that vocation. So what we got to try to do now is, it's there. We have the wood. We have all of this great resource. Now we have to market it. Just like I think most people, there's no way they can understand that it's going to take 100 years for the tree to grow. They don't see it. So as a result, they don't understand the 120-year cycle. I didn't understand it. And again, I've joked with the guys, but I'm a perfect example of the average person out there that has nothing to do with agriculture. So it's been a wonderful experience for me. Market. We got to market it. We got to educate. You got to have the safety program. Those are all things that are truly easy to accomplish. The 15 million, Marty and I are just sidebarring here. When you think about the 17 billion, that's not a lot of money. In order to help set that process in motion, set the example to get those other companies to get on board, and maybe we got something that's going to work.
And you take that concept, you're such a, don't call yourself average because you caught on so fast that you're the kind of student anybody wants to deal with. But to take your concept one step further, the way that we can circumvent the challenge that Pennsylvania has as the largest hardwood producing state in the nation, that we can take that and expand our tertiary industry so that our industry isn't so exposed to this tariff thing that's going on, because it looks like it may last. So as you mentioned in Lancaster County, the cabinet shops and all those small shops, if we can expand that to consume our own raw material, we can then build even a greater economy on that, because we're adding value, we're adding jobs, and we're adding products that the world needs.
Well, Marty and I have talked about this issue, not just about timber, but ag in general, dairy in general. Grown in PA, by PA, PA preferred. People in Pennsylvania are very competitive. They love their Regals, they love their Penguins, they love their Pirates. They would love their own food if they knew it was theirs, okay? So all of this has to do with marketing. And again, I think there's an awful lot here that's very positive. And certainly you can develop, you know, a rather comfortable life at a six-figure salary with the right safety measures, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to continue the conversation on how we can actually market. Maybe we're going to put some money into actually marketing it to try to develop a kind of an attitude out there.
Dave, I think.
I'm trying to gain for commission perspective.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to frame some of the discussions. We're really down in the weeds, and that's important. And I think take a little bit of a bigger picture, step back and say impacts on the back end. We're talking about workforce development and the lack of a workforce potentially in the future. I can tell you it's very real, and it's very real right now. And the impacts are large and compounding. I'll give you a for instance. We've got several contracts on our books right now. When we do a timber sale contract with the Game Commission, it's usually a 2-year window. When we plan those, we set those contracts up by usually investing in that site first by spending some money, putting some herbicide on the ground to control undesirable vegetation so we get the right kind of habitat back that we want. Sometimes that's tens of thousands of dollars in investment up front. We have the time of our workforce out there preparing those areas. I have contracts right now that are coming up against their 2-year window, and I have the industry coming back to me saying, I'd like to get this cut, but I can't get a logging crew on the site right now. I don't have available crews to do the work. So we want to be good partners with the industry, trying to work with these people saying, okay, I can give you another year of an extension on your contract. We'll try to get this done. If it would ever stop raining, maybe we could get something done in the woods. But I frame that to say, that's 2 growing seasons now after I put the herbicide down. If I don't get that overstory changed within that window, I lose that effectiveness. So now I've got to come back and spend more of our sportsmen's money to put more herbicide down to control that understory. That's 2 more years that grouse are waiting for places to put their nests. That's 2 more years of deer looking for something to eat, and all the economic impacts that come back from that. So in the big picture, when we talk about workers' comp rates and we're talking about all the nuts and bolts of insurance and everything, there's some very real and big impacts that impact a lot of people that aren't thinking about, well, why is it important that we worry about the logger workforce? There's some big picture stuff that's happening right now when I have big companies, reputable companies saying, I want to do this contract, but I can't get the people in the woods to do the work right now. There's a lot of competition for good logging crews. When we make comments about having the state mandate using, workers' comp, only people that have workers' comp or only that have SFI training, I sit back and I'm a little reticent to put any more restrictions in place on people coming to work on our lands because I can't even get enough of them as it is. So it gives me that little bit of a pause to say, geez, I believe in it. We want our people taken care of. We want them trained. We want them insured. But can I afford to put another restriction on the potential workforce available to come and work on our lands? I mean, DCNR and the Game Commission put together, we're not even, 20% of the total forest ownership? So it would be a statement if we mandated it. Would it have a big effect? I'd be willing to take it on in an environment where I had confidence that I would have enough people to do the work, which I don't have right now. So those are some of my concerns when we talk about the big picture, far-reaching impacts. We've grown our program over 50% in output in the last 6 years, from where we were 10 years ago to where we are today. 6,000 acres 10 years ago, 9,000 acres, hopefully 10,000 acres next year. Timber harvest happening on game lands. We're trying to create more habitat, better habitat. Rough grouse are imperiled right now from West Nile virus and other things. The best way to help them is by creating great young forest habitat. I can't do it without a great logging workforce out there. So I just wanted to throw some big picture around that.
Representative Wentworth.
Yeah, just wanted to make a comment about the possibility of maybe some short-term relief regarding workers' comp. It's my understanding that there's businesses like yourself that may have never had claims, and the audits that take place are pretty onerous and kind of create a lot of record keeping, more requirements for record keeping, and I don't know if there's anything we can do, from the state to not have such a burden through the audits. I'm not sure if any of you experienced that or not with workers' comp, but if you wanted to make a comment about that, perhaps.
So in our case, our logging contractors are contractors. They run their own independent businesses. And so their audits and everything take place for their business.
Sure.
And not necessarily for our business. And so, of course, the loggers mostly are not good businessmen. And so record keeping and things like that are burdensome for them, for sure.
I'd like to follow up and comment a little further on that. As Ken was alluding, that I think the latest statistic I heard is the average age of a logger nationwide is 56 years old. Is that correct? I believe that's right. And if you think about it, historically, what attracted an individual to that profession was he had a good work ethic. He wasn't overly gregarious, was happy to be in the woods all day long by himself, and had a great appreciation for nature, and prospered well with those as, his strength set. Today, if he wants to get into the industry, you want him to be astute to looking up NEPA certifications, then he has to deal with workers' comp, DEP issues, DOT issues, and the list goes on. So the whole complexion of his responsibility, we didn't change it, but it's changed. And somehow or other, we have to find some type of way for government to be more supportive of growing that profession. instead of more restrictive of growing that profession.
Thank you.
Representative Zimmerman?
Yeah, so my question revolves around education. You know, with the whole workforce issue and the challenges we have there, and it doesn't look like that's going to end anytime soon. And, you know, you mentioned an average forester's mid-50s or more. That's pretty much what an average farmer is. And the question is, since we're 6 generations removed from the farm, we're probably that far removed from forestry in reality. Do we have any programs in our ag classes? Is there even ag programs in our schools up in these parts? You know, those are my questions. Is there any kind of training, any kind of education happening on any level at this point?
That's a great question, and there are some school districts in Pennsylvania that do offer curriculums in SFI training for chainsaws and whatnot. But again, as a school director for 30 years, being in a rural area, our school district was 40 miles from the local career technical center. So back in the 70s, our school district said it's very inefficient to send kids that far to a vocational school. So we established a vocational agriculture curriculum, of which the students in that curriculum received a semester of masonry, carpentry, electrical, welding, timber harvesting, small engines. And the Department of Ed took that educational curriculum away from rural school districts. Now our school district is sending the students we can 40 miles to a career technical center. So I think what's happened, there's been a little bit of a disconnect. We're so eager to get our children, our students, to trained in something that we don't give them the choice of life. If we give them the choice of exposure to all of those different disciplines in high school, then they can choose what they want to do in life. They could choose to go to a Penn College and go into the different aspects rather than come out of a high school curriculum as a, what is it, the auto industry or ATC certified or something as an auto mechanic. Well, let's not make a kid choose at 15. Let's give them an exposure to grow up. Let's give all of our children an exposure to grow up and experience it, and not protect them until they're 18, but then force them into making a decision that when they come out of school at 18, they're trained to do a job. Let's expose them to a lot of things. So if we back off a little bit and give those rural school districts those opportunities, I think we're going to help the workforce, because we've seen a decline in the workforce even in the rural communities as well as urban. Does that make sense?
Ken, that makes a lot of sense. And so the question is, as legislators, we should probably be looking more at that kind of thing. Down in my district, for example, I like to take my staff to businesses. We have lots of them. And it's amazing. Every business I get to, they want the trades, and they can't find anybody. So somehow, as a state, we need to be focusing on trades. We need to be focusing more on maybe getting the things you just mentioned back into our high schools and give these kids an opportunity to, learn the things that business really needs today compared to what it might have needed 10 years ago.
Just this morning, I was on the phone to one of our local excavating contractors, and he hired a young man who graduated with an IEP diploma. And he holds on to him with the dream of making that kid into an equipment operator. The kid's 20 years old. He's pushed him and helped him get a CDL, a commercial driver's license. And he said, the biggest problem I have with this kid is he's lazy. And that truly comes from developing a work ethic. If you look at every one of us with a work ethic, that work ethic comes long before you realize you have it. It might be pushing a lawnmower at 10 or 12 years old, or shoveling snow in the northern tier at 8 or 7 years old. But that work ethic is put in, and we as parents have probably made some mistakes of protecting our children too much and not instilling that work ethic. So,
I think that's right, Ken. If you don't learn to work by the time you're 18, you probably never will.
exactly. And my statement is,
I think it's 12.
If you show me a person that's willing to work, I'll show you a person with a job. And that's something, we can't legislate that, but we can do things within society together to bring those things along. Because if we're going to develop a workforce in the forest products industry, it truly comes from work ethic, not from some gimmick.
Well, and I'll just share two quick stories. One is that one business manufacturer that we toured the plant, and he's shown us an area that was behind chain link fence where he had, young individuals under 18 that were doing some pretty much packaging because they can't operate anything. And he said, with all the safety equipment we have today on the machinery and the likes of that, he said the new 18 should be 16. So that's one thing to think about.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, so the new 18 should be 16, and I don't know how we get that accomplished in Harrisburg, but
historically, our logging force came up through the family, and they were like ag, like farmers. They were exposed to that at a young age. They were put on a tractor, at 12, 14, 15, and the same thing. They went out and helped their dad on the weekends in the woods. And now they can't do that until they're 18. Well, they're gone by then. They don't have an interest at that point.
Right.
So there is a federal bill that is looking to, it's actually called the Future Logging Careers Act. I don't know where it is in the process, if it's just been introduced, but it would allow young people 16 and 17 to work in the woods. And if there's some way we could do that from a state perspective, and again, allow them to be treated as agriculture and farm.
With an agriculture exemption, yeah.
Well, when we're talking about disconnect within farming and with agriculture, so the Fair Labor Standards Act considers forestry, that's the federal act, considers forestry as a non-agriculture. And then they continue to list that as a hazardous forestry. It's actually one of the most hazardous occupations that they're considering. So within the state level, there's not a way currently, because if we do try to make the minimum age, or the minimum age 16 or 17, we're still going to have the federal law that's going to preempt all our state laws in that. So it's really important that we get to the federal level to get this change, to get it as an agriculture.
I think that's why this bill
where we
has
have to
been
go with it.
introduced. But like I said, I don't know where it is. I know it has been introduced. And a lot of industry groups have been lobbying to get that done.
I looked into it. Representative Wyszynski had asked me to research it and look into trying to draft a bill, and that we just hit a brick wall with that because of that federal. Anything we did, it would be null and void.
I think, to go back to what Ken said about the VOAG programs, having that, even that introduction into different trades would really be helpful. I think there is a much greater recognition, I think, right now that not everybody has to go to college, and that there are a lot of occupations that would be really productive and they actually pay well, and you don't have to come out of college with $100,000 worth of debt. You can, it's manageable. You can learn to do these trades and you can have good occupations. So I think if there's some way we can start reinforcing that in schools and especially in rural communities, you'd think it'd be a no-brainer.
Well, I want to throw something out here. Your community colleges have adapted very well to a lot of the occupations that are in dire need, whether it's nursing, whether it's welding, mechanical things in manufacturing. So I think we can connect with our community college, and let's see if we can come up with a legitimate course in how to become a timberjack, okay? And again, $100,000, a six-figure salary, has to be more than sufficient to attract some people to that. Whether they make it through, whether they'll actually become a good quality timberman, that's another story. I can't say that, but I think that's something I would certainly like to pursue.
I will echo what Ken said, though, is that there is a lack of exposure at an early age. For example, I wanted to do VOAG when I was in high school, and I'm not too far removed from high school. Right.
Look like you're about 16 now.
But anyway, I wanted to do the VOAG curriculum, and my choice was if I wanted to go to college, which I did. I could go into vet sci, or I could do ag mechanics, or I could do something like wildlife and fish, but I couldn't do all three. And I think having that exposure, having that intro program that would have allowed me to see what was going on in all of these industries, and my family's business is hiring people right out of the ag mechanics program. But you have to pick that from ninth grade, essentially, to be able to get into that. You have to be interested from right in the beginning. So I think that's something we could consider.
I think we have the long-term and short-term goals. The long-term would be what you're talking about,
right.
Setting up a curriculum early on, exposing the kids early on, but I also see
And that goes back
short-term.
long before high school.
Yeah, definitely.
Karen?
We did recently, the General Assembly established the Commission for Agricultural Education Excellence, and as part of that also included very specifically the word forestry in K through 12 programming. I don't know how it's being executed by the teachers, but maybe a conversation with the forestry industry, the forest products industry, with the commission, the Ag Ed Commission, would be beneficial, because they are required to develop and coordinate ag education programming for the state. So, we do very much in many of our statutes certainly include timber and wood products as part of agriculture. So it makes perfect sense to include it in an ag education curriculum. But I think that maybe I can suggest that some of you get on, or one or more of you get on the agenda for one of their upcoming commission meetings in the future.
Well, I can certainly see that happens and provide that opportunity.
Yeah, Wayne could, certainly, that'd be great. Yeah, since you're down the hall from the folks, yeah.
A concern that I'd like to raise, if I can punt the ball another direction, but similarly, one of the issues that has been mentioned is combining that the linkage between agriculture and forestry and the wood products industry. And one of those issues that we haven't addressed is the issue of ordinances and permits. I have a gentleman that keeps telling me that in agriculture, you can't have a farmer fill out a permit to be able to harvest his beans or his tomatoes or his hay. There's no permits allowed in that situation. However, there are permits and ordinances that are being established in townships that unreasonably restrict the forestry. Through the ACRE program, we've had several of those challenged, and all of those that have been challenged have been ruled by the attorneys generals in favor of the industry and the process. We are about to have published soon a new edition of a document that was written in 2004, in part by industry and consultants and by Penn State. And Penn State is republishing that in the next couple months, hopefully by July 1. That we will be sending that out to the townships, to all the supervisors, to every township will receive it. And hopefully that they could be aware that they're passing ordinances. What sometimes is happening in Chester County, in certain counties in the state, they're passing ordinances sometimes to deal with a particular problem logger. Sometimes that logger is not English. And so there's some issues sometimes being dealt with that way. and they're trying to restrict that, and that becomes a part of a problem as those ordinances then get passed on to other townships, and suddenly an ordinance that's been recommended for a metropolitan area or urban area suddenly is finding its way into McKean County or Chester County or Sullivan County or whatever other counties that don't necessarily apply. So we're concerned about the proliferation of these ordinances and wanting to make sure that townships understand there's a difference between zoning ordinances and timber harvesting ordinances, and a major issue there. So we have a new document about to come out, but that will address some of it. But it may also need some words of wisdom from certain areas. For example, DEP could simply put out a resolution that says conservation districts are not allowed to approve timber harvest plans. That's not a part of their process, but yet many townships put those into their ordinances, and it's not a function of the conservation district. They can review them, they can't approve them.
You're going to want to include PennDOT in those entities also because of the weight limit issue.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily apply. Or
We do have, in the ordinance, we do talk about that, and we are presenting a model ordinance.
regarding limits for weight and how that doesn't necessarily apply in many instances because of the fact that it's part of ag and those timber trucks.
Right.
Okay, good.
Well, when you talk about ordinances, that's another problem, even though state lands are not subject to municipal ordinances for how we manage land as far as timber harvesting ordinances, our contractors do have to abide by road weight limit ordinances. And that was one that actually just came up in the last couple of weeks for me in Representative Diamond's district with a gentleman logger that's actually from New Holland. Where he was out working on a game lands job. He was using the township roads. It was not posted when he started the project, and now all of a sudden there's a 10-ton weight limit on the township road. And hopefully we're going to give him access out a different way out of the game lands to go through a different township. But we're trying to work with that township to understand, did they follow the appropriate engineering studies and the requirements of Title 67, Chapter 189, and all that good stuff. But those are issues that we find quite a bit.
Bridge by Sopera State Park?
Trying to Bethel Township.
Oh, I know which bridge you're talking about, yeah.
So,
yeah,
just some of those kinds of issues that we find with ordinances often. I know when I worked on the private sector, I had to have a book with every township I was working in and what ordinances they had and where I was going to try to work with a private landowner and meet the requirements of that township with those timber harvest ordinances. But the road issue ordinances, we know how to work through PennDOT controlled roads. It's a pretty simple process, but oftentimes townships maybe aren't aware of all the nuance of the road bonding things that they need to follow as far as PennDOT regulations as well.
But through the acre, isn't there some exception potentially that maybe it's being, overthought, overregulated?
But potentially, but that's one where looking at forestry as agriculture and looking at letters of local determination and things like that, like ag gets for delivering milk, if they're using a truck that's equal weight on the same road and they're exempt from bonding, and then a log truck's only taking two loads a day out of there, and then he has to bond, so those kinds of things I think are what.
Yeah, there's a difference if it's a snowstorm.
We had the same thing come up with SAP. Kerry and I were working on an issue with, they were considering that a commercial product. It actually is an agricultural product, right? SAP, but they were bonding some roads and.
The answer on that for me. Wayne
What's that?
gave me the answer to
Yes,
pass back to you.
so that was something we worked on, yeah. But I have to head out here shortly, but I appreciate being able to be here today. The one question I did have was on the hospital. I sit on the health committee as well, so I'm going to look into this reporting, like how these hospitals report injuries with chainsaws, like that. So if my neighbor goes out and is cutting down his ash tree that's dead, and that's a logging accident, and that would go towards the workman's comp. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy stuff. That's crazy stuff.
It's not a whole lot different than the influx of buyers that come in here to buy our forest products are treated as tourists because they stay in our hotels and eat in our restaurants.
That's true too.
Yeah. So is New York State
doing it different up there as far as accidents and reports at hospitals? Do we
I
have
don't
any
know,
idea?
I don't know that. Maybe Bob does. Do you know if they report accidents differently in New York State?
I don't believe they do, and I can't comment on Wayne's example. I can only tell you one thing I think I should, if I can take just a minute to clear up. When you look at New York State, the W.J. Cox program, which is one alternative financing program, carries the $17 rate. There are other rates available in New York State that are much higher. The W.J. Cox program requires the visits in the woods to the logging crews, requires the education, so on, and there are some crews in New York State who choose not to put themselves through that and therefore are paying a higher rate just to kind of demonstrate the independence. That's the New York example, and that's what we'd be looking at in Pennsylvania, an alternative financing mechanism that would allow the rate to be set as it is. Cox is a trust in New York.
I'm going to look into the healthcare side of it and see if there's anything out there. We're working on a couple of bills right now through the committee that are going to require different reporting, hopefully. So this may be something we could look at.
That would help.
As far as workforce development, Dave, I mean, it's every meeting we go to, I mean, it's the same thing, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. I'd love to, you know, say we can fix it, but I mean, literally, it's a work ethic issue, and it's going to be challenging for a while. And I think we're working at it, but it is going to be a major issue. It's a cultural issue. I'm trying to fix it in my house. I have 4 kids, and my oldest is 10, and every Sunday night I give them new contracts for the week, and I have certain jobs, and if they don't fulfill them, they don't get paid. It's $1 a day. It's costing me a lot. But I'm sticking my nose up to the federal government on this one. So you're on record. They're not logging, okay? They are picking up sticks out of the yard, though.
Could be reported as a logging injury.
But I think it starts in the home. I think we have to, you know, encourage parents and folks. It's a cultural issue to encourage them to look at other options for education after school, during school, or school-to-work programs. I know our business, we have school-to-work employees from the schools, and they're not logging, but they're working in our stores, and it's good. So I think that we have to. You're starting to see a cultural change, and I think that anything that we can do as legislators to encourage that, and you as well in our communities, it's so important, because if we don't, I mean, it's gonna compound, and these things are screwing everything up. So they're good, but
that's true. I mean,
it is. I mean,
I've often toyed with the idea of starting a new movement called No Screen Till They're 18. Because seriously, this is turning their minds to mush. It really is.
One thing we did try this year was pass a bill that would require individuals to work at least a few hours a week for some of the government assistance, and we weren't able to get that accomplished, but I think that still would be a good bill.
So I'll be the contrarian here when it comes to the youth and their work ethic. And I can just tell you, this is a small segment of the work population, but DCNR started the Pennsylvania Outdoor Corps about 4 years ago. So we employ, and this is money coming from Department of Labor and Industry for workforce development, and it's doing exactly that. So we're taking 250 youth, and it's 18 to 25, and they're doing conservation projects on DCNR land, some community opportunities. We teach a core of them. We don't teach them all, but we teach a core of them chainsaw safety. Some of them get certifications in pesticide application. So they're working outside. Part of the program is to teach them a work ethic, to show up on time, to look someone in the face when you're talking to them, those types of things, and it works. We picked up some of those folks ourselves within DCNR, and I hope that some of those kids that come out of that program with the young adults, not kids, so young adults that are coming out of that program do come out with a work ethic, and I think that the generation's a little bit different, so they're different than us, right? And so we have to treat them differently.
And some, it might sound like you're treating them with kid gloves at some point, but at the end of the day, you're trying to get an end product, so you kind of work backwards there. So I think there are opportunities for us to take the workforce and really develop those folks into the next generation of workers. We're also doing a program with the Department of Corrections, where we're teaching prisoners that are getting ready to get out to become arborists. And again, they're not foresters, they're not loggers, but they're arborists. But it is giving them a job skill that gets them into the outdoor community, the types of work that we're talking about. So there are opportunities to develop our workforce moving forward.
Are you still taking applications? Can we send people your way?
Inmates are all
They'll be ready.
We probably have a few vacancies, but most of them, I mean, it fills up fairly quickly. And we do it in, it's like 17 different locations around the state. So we do one out of St. Mary's and Meadville and Williamsport and Renovo. Yeah, that's the northern tier places. It works.
Pretty good. What are they, like 13 and a half or something like that, 12?
We're paying them 12 and a quarter an hour, I believe it is, to start.
I know Park has more questions.
Oh, I do.
And we were going to adjourn at 4, so we have 15 minutes. So I'd like to hit the topics if you have more.
What I'd like to speak about at some point is the question about markets, China tariffs, and also the new economic development or economic impact study that the Department of Ag, 17 billion is low, it's now 21.6 billion.
Okay. Wow, it's even better, Eddie.
Guys are doing pretty good.
So would you like me to speak to that now?
Sure.
Okay.
Good working.
I've worked for the council for 20 years, and during that time, the international market's been a very significant part of that, because 20 years ago is when the furniture industry left our country, in part, and went to the Pacific Rim nations. And a large part of my work as the hardwoods development specialist was to help companies go into those international markets, and companies who were used to selling to North Carolina because the quality of our lumber was such that went into the high quality furniture. And so we needed to find new customers. So we went to China and Vietnam, Korea, as well as other European and even Brazil. I've traveled significantly and taken over 100 different companies from Pennsylvania into that international export market. In 2017, we hit a record of our export in value of $560 million exported in 2017. In 2018, though, we had a 10% decline. Much of that was directly related to the Chinese market and related to the roller coaster. There's going to be a tariff, there's not going to be a tariff, there is a tariff, there isn't. And so there was a situation going on. We also believe that that decline in the Chinese market was not just related to those tariff games that were going on at that time. But we did have a 10% decline. What we did think was going on is there's somewhat a slowing down of the middle class confidence in their own government, and that they're not buying as they were. The emerging middle class in China was what was really driving the price of lumber in the United States and increasing the value of the forest land in Pennsylvania as well. In part, again, because of the over 70% of the logs that we're exporting are going to China. And so China's buying those logs as well. There was an 8% decline in log exports, and again, it was primarily the Chinese market that dropped. And the question is, as far as the tariffs this year, the tariff roller coaster is continuing, and with new dates and new imposition of tariffs, and whether they're 5%, 20%, 25%, there's different numbers. There's a new tariff that's being imposed June 1st for anything arriving in China after June 1st. There's another date of September for us in the forest products industry for another round of tariffs, which will cause this roller coaster. So we're going to certainly see a slowing down of that Chinese market that's continuing. I can tell you that the National Hardwood Federation, which is our lobby in Washington, as well as our National Hardwood Lumber Association, is currently conducting a survey with all of the forest products industry, not just their own members, asking for them to report the impact of those tariffs that they've already experienced on their own companies and what their loss of income has been due to the tariffs and due to some federal program that they'll be entitled to some reimbursement on some of those losses of income. But at the same time, that survey is also asking, while our industry is being impacted by those tariffs, our industry is generally an industry that is a Republican industry. And so they're being also asked, do you support the tariffs at the same time? So it's sort of a double-edged sword in this situation where it's affecting us, but at the same time, the tariffs, if they win, they may be helpful to our country and to the industry. The challenge for the forest products industry is we became a global industry and paid the price for that 20 years ago. And now upsetting the apple cart with new tariffs and changing and pulling things back we're paying a price a second time around. So those are some of the issues that way. And so the question is, if we see the Chinese market declining, who is going to be that new market for our hardwoods? There's a lot of speculation that Vietnam will be, and they're a major because of the low income, and there in Vietnam, it's products that are going to be re-exported back to us. And in the U.S., Vietnam is the third largest market. In Pennsylvania, it's about the fourth or fifth. But it's a potential. India down the road also shows a potential market. But as we look at it, we really believe that the real new market is the United States. There's a major decline in the American consumption of American hardwoods. Our millennial generations, our younger generations, and even older, they're buying alternatives to wood instead of buying wood. They're buying stuff that looks like wood, but they're not buying solid hardwood. They're buying laminate floors from China that are engineered and made in China and cheap, but they're not putting in solid hardwood floors. In kitchens, they're putting in glued up sawdust in MDF kitchen cabinetry instead of the solid hardwood cabinets. And a classic example of what may have been a contributor, we lost 1,000 jobs, over 900 jobs in Pennsylvania this week with the closing of Wood Mode in Kramer, Pennsylvania, Snyder County. That's a major concern to us. But we're also seeing other concerns in the industry as things are slowing down, a little unstable. We've been going through the last couple of years with the export market strong, that was covering it. But the domestic market is declining, and the council has already established sort of a marketing program called the American Hardwood, the Natural Choice, which is a brochure that I'll be glad to distribute to you that we have to the consumer to say it's good and wise to use American wood. It's sustainable. We lead the world in sustainable forestry. It's the greenest building product. There's nothing you can use better if you're concerned about the environment than using local sustainable wood. So as we look at all of these issues, we're trying, and the council is focusing much more on helping to grow the domestic market, both in kitchen cabinetry, flooring, and millwork, and any of those areas where we can buy wood locally rather than just on the international markets. So I wanted to raise those issues for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also did prepare an outline of some of the issues that I have, so I'll hand those out to you afterward.
So just a little further on Wayne's comments, the other thing that's happening, especially recently, is not only alternative products, but alternative species preference. And so right now in our local area, cherry is under extreme duress. And it's because what's popular, of course, is painted cabinets. And so paint grade lumber, which is lower value lumber, is high in demand domestically. And so, our bread and butter in this area has been black cherry. And it is not good right now. And the future, I can't say what the future is, but it doesn't look good if we don't change the demand back towards a natural wood instead of painted products. You know, poplar and brown soft maple are big sellers right now because it's all painted product.
I didn't realize that was a preference for people, you know, that people were leaning in that direction.
Absolutely. Painted.
Especially when you're in a building like this.
But watch the home shows on television. Everything is painted moldings, painted cabinets, everything's painted.
Guess I'm not not in tune, I guess.
Just a quick story, Conestoga Wood Product, which is, they make a lot of doors for cabinets. And the new committee chair of Labor and Industry in the House wanted a tour, so gave him a tour of the plant. And they're well over 60% is now the glued up sawdust and painted and the likes of that. And so it has changed a lot. And the question is there any, are you guys doing anything in the way of marketing to see if that can be turned around somehow? Because it looks like it's a trend that went pretty quickly, according to Conestoga.
So how many years ago was Chekhov a big deal? So you know, our industry is a very fragmented industry, and it's hard to get consensus on anything. So as an industry, I don't know that there's much marketing going on from the industry. I think each individual company is probably marketing their products as best they can, but you know, there is no collective effort like the dairy industry or something like that. And there was no consensus in the Chekhov program whether timber or forest products companies were willing to form a collective effort to market that product.
Right after the 2008 recession, that started, and initially there was some real good momentum for it because nobody was selling anything in 2009 and 10. But by the time in the process and the way the Chekhov program worked, by the time 3 years later it came out to final, almost to get to the vote, the USDA didn't even bring it to a vote of the industry. They realized the division that was there. So there's not. So, and Pennsylvania is one of the only states, New York State has a development council as well, not nearly to the state level of Pennsylvania. And some other states have state level programs. Indiana probably, Indiana's a classic example. Indiana has only 20% of their state is forested, and yet last year they were the second state after Pennsylvania leading in hardwood exports from Indiana. So they're doing a good job marketing their program. But Pennsylvania is sort of the leader among other states as far as, because we have the Hardwoods Development Council doing that marketing on behalf of the state. And the logo that we have, the Pennsylvania Hardwood logo, stands for quality. Is well known, especially in China and worldwide, and it's used by anyone in the industry. That's sort of our brand. But we do have some companies that are also Pennsylvania preferred, and we again would promote the fact that you're buying local and using the PA preferred program.
Well, in my conversation with the folks there at Conestoga, like you say, the recession hit and everything changed, and so the trend has been towards as cheap as they can and still look pretty, so it's all, you know, using sawdust and painting, but they're interested in getting back to using real wood as much as they possibly can. So any marketing efforts are, I'm sure, valuable.
And Wayne, what you said is exactly the reason we have to fund the Hardwood Development Council. And I know you're not allowed to comment on that, but I will make that comment. That's important to us. So.
I also think they need a little bit extra this year, I think. What they have is a bare minimum. We got to give them a little bit of a bump.
Well, we're looking at that too.
Okay?
We're going to let Park have the last go with the microphone.
So there's been a lot of talk today about workforce development. I was very honored to be able to be a shop teacher for almost 20 years, and actually taught in the same wing as the VOAG department, who I believe actually did some some timber and chainsaw safety. But anyway, so I got a chance to expose students to all kinds of different things, basic electricity. I had a traditional metal shop. Did a wood shop class before I came to this with the middle school. But anyway, so I understand what you're saying about exposure to all the different aspects to that. But I get a couple different maybe comments and questions. One would be is to touch on, what Marty had actually mentioned in regards to funding. And I guess I'm not allowed to ask the question of the current proposed.
There's others who can answer.
Yeah. So, I think I already know the answer. It's maybe a little redundant. And I know how the trend's been over the last number of years, regarding agriculture and your industry specifically through the proposal from the governor. And we typically, we always fight to make sure those numbers, are either, appear or increased. I know the chairman had mentioned opened a window up to the Restore PA. It's my understanding that money would be funded through a severance tax. We currently, have one that has a little bit different name. It's called an impact fee. But in regards to the severance, there's concern. I've heard concern from the industry that if we're going to have a severance tax on oil, on gas, what about a severance on timber? So that that's another concept that would open a door up to something like that. And again, just more of a comment. But I do want to talk a little bit about the game lands and timber. You mentioned Lebanon earlier. I'm actually from the Northwest, Mercer, Erie, Crawford, Lawrence, in the western part of those areas. And our folks back home would love to see the opportunities to get access to the state game lands in regards to timber in that area. They'd love to be able to bid on something like that. It's been 20-some years since they've seen any kind of sustained logging in that area. So anything you can do to help in that regard. For them to go outside of that area is extremely problematic, just the way the industry is. So thank you for that. And let's see here. I'm just going through my list here. Want to make sure we get everything. Oh, and then one final thing. There's been some real issues in regards to the waste product, the bark, the sawdust, the bark mulch that's produced from the sawmills. Those are getting stockpiled. There's an opportunity for potentially fire hazard. I'm not sure if it spontaneously combusts like sawdust would necessarily, but what about renewable energy? There's a lot of talk about renewable energy. What about that bark mulch and that byproduct being able to be utilized? It's not a wood pellet. It probably doesn't have that same value as far as heat, but that's another avenue too that needs to be looked at in regards to that waste. So. And then I guess another potential use for that too is for, there's been some talk about brine being an issue on our roads. That they've actually looked at the possibility of utilizing that mulch or even sawdust to put on roads for ice and snow. So just another idea there too. If anyone has comments on any of the items that I brought up, I'd appreciate if we have time. Chairman, thank you.
Maybe the sawdust issue, I don't refer to it as waste, but what is most of your sawdust going towards? What is it being used for?
A lot of sawdust is used for the drying of lumber and the process itself, so it's consumed. Bark is tremendously more problematic. And so in preparation for today, I couldn't find any audited, documented notes. So I created my own. So you don't know if they're right or wrong. You can't argue with them, can you? But we produce in excess of 1 billion board feet of lumber a year in Pennsylvania. For every 1,000 board feet, a ton of bark is generated. Went through all the crunching, and it's about 5 million cubic yards of bark that we produce in Pennsylvania. So most of it's used for mulch. That's been historic. According to Google, There's 952 public high schools and 549 private high schools. So if you went to every high school football stadium and you put 4 inches of mulch over top of their football field, you would cover 14% of the bark that's produced in the state. We make that much bark a year, that much bark. And we're at a point right now that it's of zero value to the facilities producing it. Very few sawmills benefit from the sale. If you'll pay the trucking, you can have all you want. So anything that would bring biomass opportunities, bring residual waste opportunities, would be well welcomed by our industry.
So it's not made into pellets, or it's
Sawdust
not
is.
economical to?
The sawdust.
Sawdust,
Not
yeah.
the bark.
Not the bark.
Will the bark burn? The bark will burn.
Northwest Hardwoods is actually investigating that right now because we burn our bark, or we burn our sawdust as well to fire the boilers for the dry kilns. But we're also investigating whether bark will burn as well and what kind of emissions issues and things like that.
Bark will burn. Bark has the highest BTU value of any part of a tree, but it also is full of all the dirt that we get when we drag it out of the woods. It also has an extremely high moisture content, and it gives off more emissions. So it's got strikes against it, but yes, it will burn. And if you come by the mill sometime shortly, if it doesn't cure itself, you'll see it burning. It kind of catches on fire on its own, so that's not a good thing.
Spontaneous combustion.
And David, did you want to talk about the game lands timber harvest up in the northwest?
I had something else I was going to say before and I couldn't remember. Oh, it was about, when we were talking about the marketing, I'm going to jump back to that real quick, about hardwoods and cherry, laminates versus hardwoods and all that stuff. And I agree, that's absolutely important. Something else I think of, maybe a little more, it hits home for us, and since we're in Elk County and Dom Tar Paper Mills right here, low-grade markets. As much as the high-quality saw timber markets struggle at times, the low-grade markets for pulp and for wood pellets and things like that really seem to be ephemeral. They're either boom or bust. I mean, there was a 2-year period where we couldn't get anybody to cut low-value material, and if Ken Kane had mentioned, a lot of the things we do now is rehabilitating some mismanaged forest lands. We need to have markets for that low-grade material. The Luke paper, the Verso paper mill in Luke, Maryland, that's Maryland, but I had 2 entire timber sale contracts where all the material for those contracts in Bedford County were going down to that paper mill, and they're shutting their doors at the end of the month. So that's going to have ripple impacts back into, now there's going to be a glut of material on the market flooding into other outlets, and so those challenges are not just on the high-end saw timber solid wood markets, but on those low-grade pulp and paper. We got to put our phones away and have Wayne print a bunch more of these out for us. So I actually have a little tagline. If any of you have ever gotten an email from me, at the bottom of my email, it says, feel free to print this email because trees are a renewable resource. So I think I put that on every email I have. So it's in my signature block. But it's important for creating sustainable habitat, sustainable forest of the right quality and type, that we have markets across the board, not just our high-value hardwoods, but also you look at Dom Tar, big employer, Gladfelder paper, well, now it's Pixel owned by, but a couple years ago, a plant out in Ohio shut down, and that crippled our ability to move material in this state because all the material that was going to the plant in Ohio flooded into here to Clarion Board Company and Mount Jewett MDF plant and Dom Tar paper, places like that. So now we have this Maryland mill shutting down, and what's that going to do? So I just wanted to put a word out there that it's not just all hardwoods all the time. We need those other outlets too. But yeah, to the Northwest region, actually, I started my career with the Game Commission as the field forester for those counties in Mercer and Lawrence and Crawford counties. Crawford County, we usually have a lot of work going on. Those places are a little bit challenging because it's so wet. But we restructured our workforce actually a little bit recently and added some new folks to our forestry program, and we've actually got some plans to get onto some more of those game lands in Mercer County and Lawrence County in particular, to do some more work because they have been neglected because they're kind of way out there and they're smaller properties. But yeah, you're spot on, Representative. That is a place where we are focusing.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for being here today and for sitting here for 3 hours and for the discussion, all the information that you've presented. It helps us as a committee when we go back to Harrisburg and the policy issues that we tackle, and we look forward to the continued dialogue and working with you on issues dealing with the forest products industry. So thank you all very much. I want to thank Representative Gobler for hosting us here today. We're glad to be here in Elk County, and thank all the members that traveled into the area. So with that, our meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.